to just go ahead and dive in and start explaining that concept, Jonathan.
That's a big part of how Wall Street's been running us into a ditch for the last 30 years.
The debt ceiling is not some sort of macroeconomic concept.
The U.S. isn't really a great place, and it's not really the land of the free.
Get 1,000 people together and let's go lay siege to City Hall.
Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We have a fantastic show for you, as always. I want to start with the plugs as usual. Actually, first, I want to thank Commie John for the super chat. Happy International Workers' Day to you as well, and to all of the viewers at home. Start with the RP plugs, realprogressives.org, to find out more about us, find all of our fantastic content from articles, one of which we're going to read today, to podcasts, etc., educational information on MMT, which is another thing we're going to talk a little bit about here today. You can also go to realprogressives.org/donate to help us out. We are a nonprofit. We appreciate any donation that you can give. Go to our Patreon to become a monthly donor if you are able to do so. You can also leave a super chat in the chat there, just like John did. We really appreciate any and all support that you guys can provide. We have a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court ruling in Puerto Rico, where they essentially supported colonialism. We're going to talk a little bit about the student debt situation, with Biden sort of claiming that he may do something about student debt. I am skeptical that it will be anything that is nearly robust enough to be to my liking. I'm even skeptical it'll happen, quite frankly. But we're going to talk a little bit about that and some of the rhetoric that it has sort of created. We're going to talk about Joe Manchin's corruption. We have some MMT stuff to talk about today, you guys. I have a couple of clips, actually, of progressives who are, I think, fighting a good fight in what they're saying, but are perhaps using some rhetoric that MMT would frown upon, or would demonstrate to us is inaccurate and unhelpful for progressives, that being taxpayer dollar rhetoric. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I have a piece to read to you guys that was written by Fadl Kaboub. Some people saying that MMT was sort of debunked in Sri Lanka. We're going to read that piece that he put up on Stephanie Kelton's Substack. All sorts of great stories to get to today, you guys. As usual, labor update. We're going to have some coverage from More Perfect Union about Amazon and Starbucks, and we also have some further coverage about minor league baseball players and how they are exploited by Major League Baseball. We have a great interview that I did last week with Len Harris. Regular viewers might remember Len from a month or two ago. She is a Starbucks barista in Colorado who was organizing her store for a union, and they succeeded here recently. So Len came back on the show to discuss how that all went and how her colleagues and management and things responded. Great interview. We're going to bring you there. All sorts of stuff to get to today, you guys. I do want to start with that Supreme Court ruling pertaining to Puerto Rico. And we actually have a clip to show you here going into some of the details. The lone dissenting opinion was Sonia Sotomayor. Her family, I believe, is from Puerto Rico. Her parents are from Puerto Rico. And there was some interesting opining from Gorsuch as well, who sort of an unpredictable opinion from Gorsuch here, where he actually he's an originalist. So he took the originalist position and kind of disagreed with the logic that was used to come to the finding. But in essence here, the Supreme Court denying Puerto Ricans access to things like Social Security and other entitlements, despite them being part of the United States. So we have a clip here going into these details. This is Juan Gonzalez on Democracy Now! Juan's a journalist. He teaches journalism at Rutgers, and he's a co-host on Democracy Now! So he went into some of these details. He's been following this case quite closely. We'll watch this, come back and discuss.
Once again, Judge Sotomayor, who was not only born in Puerto Rico, but people forget she did her research in college, both at Princeton and at Yale, in the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. So this is a topic she has studied for many years. Once again, she finds herself as a dissenting voice in the Supreme Court. But to me, I think the far more significant development in this case, and one that most of the media coverage in the last few days has overlooked, was that there was a separate concurring opinion issued by one of the court's most conservative justices, Neil Gorsuch. His 10-page opinion, and I urge people to read it, is one of the clearest and most eloquent statements exposing U.S. colonialism that's ever been issued by a Supreme Court justice, at least in my lifetime. And it could be the signal of beginning of a long overdue change in the court on this issue. But to understand the importance of what Gorsuch says in his opinion, and I want to quote some of it in a minute or so, but we need to understand the bigger picture. We now have had 4 Supreme Court decisions in less than 6 years, all of them having to do with Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States. Back in 2016, we had the Sanchez-Valle case, which was an issue of whether Puerto Rico had separate sovereignty to be able to try people. The court said no. Then we had a few weeks later the Franklin tax-free trust case on whether Puerto Rico could declare its own bankruptcy because it had no bankruptcy protection under U.S. law. The court said no. Then in 2020, we had the Aurelius case, which was a challenge to the legitimacy of the appointments of the oversight board that Congress had established over Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was arguing this was a federal imposition. I mean, some of the litigants were arguing this was a federally imposed illegal appointments board. The United States was arguing, no, this was Puerto Rico officers that were appointed by the United States. The court once again sided against Puerto Rico. And now we have the Vallejo Madeira case, where a man who'd been receiving SSI benefits for years in this country and paying taxes in this country moves to Puerto Rico. And then years later, the government finds out that he still was collecting SSI then and says he's not eligible for those benefits and that he had to pay back $28,000. That was the basis of this latest case. All of these cases take for granted the power of Congress to do whatever it wants when it comes to Puerto Rico, and governed by the territorial clause of the Constitution, as the court interpreted more than 100 years ago in a series of cases known as the insular cases. And this is the heart of the question here, the insular cases. There were cases like Downs versus Bidwell, De Lima versus Bidwell, Dorr versus United States, Gonzalez versus Williams, Balzac versus Puerto Rico, all in the early decades of the 20th century. Let's be clear. The insular cases have been for a century the legal underpinnings of American colonialism. They provide legal justification for the United States to hold other nationalities and territory under its control. So what does Gorsuch, who is one of the most conservative justices, say about this? And his opinion is astonishing in that it calls to completely overthrow the insular cases. Let me quote to you some of what he says. He starts out in his opinion saying, a century ago in the insular cases, this court held that the federal government could rule Puerto Rico and other territories largely without regard to the Constitution. It is past time to acknowledge the gravity of this error and admit what we know to be true. The insular cases have no foundation in the Constitution and rest instead on racial stereotypes. They deserve no place in our law. Now, justices don't talk this clearly very often. He goes on to say that in the Downs case, the two main justices there, Brown and White, their opinions at bottom both rested on a view about the nation's right to acquire and exploit, quote, an unknown island peopled with an uncivilized race for commercial and strategic reasons, a right that could not be practically exercised if the result would be to endow full constitutional protection on those absolutely unfit to receive them. And it was Justice White who developed this idea of incorporated and unincorporated territories, that some territories were never meant to be part of the United States, and this included Puerto Rico and the Philippines and some of the other islands that were acquired back in the Spanish-American War. So Gorsuch goes on to say, in his opinion, the flaws in the insular cases are as fundamental as they are shameful. Nothing in the Constitution speaks of incorporated and unincorporated territories. Nothing in it extends to the latter, only certainly supposedly fundamental constitutional guarantees. And he goes on to say that the insular cases are a product of a period of ugly racial stereotypes and the theories of social Darwinists, but they have no home in our Constitution or its original understanding. Now, understand that Gorsuch, as an originalist, looks at the Constitution and says all of this justification for colonialism did not exist in the original Constitution. It was made up afterwards, and it needs to be overthrown. He goes on to say, quote, under this court's cases, we are asked to believe that the right to a trial by jury remains insufficiently fundamental to apply to some 3 million U.S. citizens in, quote, unincorporated Puerto Rico. At the same time, the full panoply of constitutional rights apparently applies on the Palmyra Atoll, an uninhabited patch of land in the Pacific Ocean, because it represents our nation's only remaining incorporated territory. It is an implausible and embarrassing state of affairs. And he says that the only reason he voted in the majority in this case was that no one asked him to overthrow the insular cases, not even the litigants on the other side. But then he ends his opinion by saying, but the time has come to recognize that the insular cases rest on a rotten foundation. And I hope the day comes soon when the court squarely overrules them. We should follow Justice Harlan and settle this question right. Our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico deserve no less. Now, Justice Sotomayor, in her opinion, her dissent also backs Gorsuch. So we now have two justices who have clearly said the insular cases, the foundation of American colonialism, need to be overthrown. And I think that is a major, major step in the court. And hopefully some of the other originalists, because one of the problems with Puerto Rico is that many of the liberal justices, Justice Breyer, Justice Ginsburg, when she was alive, Justice Kagan, have been terrible on this issue. They have not really dared to challenge the insular cases. So it may necessitate an unholy alliance of originalist conservative justices and more progressive justices to begin to finally end the legal basis for American colonialism. But I think this is definitely a step forward, and Justice Gorsuch's opinion needs to be studied more carefully.
And Juan, how does that relate to what's happening today on Capitol Hill, the lobbying day for the Puerto Rican Self-Determination Act?
Well, the big issue is that there are more and more elected officials and Puerto Rican communities in both the island and the United States that are calling for the passage of this Self-Determination Act. There's going to be a rally at 5 p.m. This evening in Lafayette Square, and there's intense lobbying going on to try to get the bill introduced by Nydia Velázquez to pass the House and the Senate, because Bob Menendez in the Senate is also co-sponsoring it, to basically allow Puerto Rico to convene a constitutional convention to decide its relationship, what it should be its relationship to Puerto Rico. And so that would be definitely a step forward, getting Congress to say, okay, we're not going to continue to dictate what our relationship with Puerto Rico is, because understand, the imposition of the control board in 2016 ended any claim that the United States had given to the world for the last 60 years, 70 years that Puerto Rico had self-government. Puerto Rico is now ruled by a U.S. appointed control board to all effectively. So it's back to the classic colonial stage. So the issue of how is that going to end? What's going to happen when the control board is lifted finally? What will be the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States still needs to be resolved. And this is the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act is definitely a step in that direction.
Absolutely incredible to me, you guys, that the legal underpinning of this stuff was essentially, oh no, those people, they're not worthy of constitutional rights. We have to determine who is and is not worthy of constitutional rights. It's outright racism. It's outright colonialism. It's incredible that that is still such a winning legal argument today, you guys. And Gorsuch here, because of his sort of staunch originalism, is poking holes in some of the evolution of that precedent and those findings by the Supreme Court, right? And Sotomayor, obviously dissenting here, I think this Supreme Court is obviously awful. Like, it's obviously, even the quote unquote liberals on this court are not all that keen to challenge corporate power or to back up regulations or anything of the sort. Not too keen to stand with workers, those kinds of things, right? So I thought it was fascinating that Gorsuch, of all justices, like the guy considered perhaps the furthest right of all of them, was the one that found an originalist argument here that sort of, now again, he didn't actually find that way. He found against Puerto Rico and on the side of colonialism, but he sort of said, like, I don't like the president, but I'm going to stand with the president in a weird way, right? Anyhow, shame on the Supreme Court there. Good reporting from Juan Gonzalez going into the details, and I wanted to make sure not to gloss over that one. I think that's a very important finding. The attitude towards, Puerto Rico should be independent, you guys, or a state, like one of the two. There's that we've put them in this kind of in between is outrageous, and it's just modern colonialism. I know I keep saying that word, but that's like, how else do you describe that, right? So anyway, we'll keep up on those kinds of stories and the findings of this court. Just fascinating bedfellows there between perhaps the progressives supporting Puerto Rico and Gorsuch, who's a constitutional originalist and about as far right as one can get. Anyhow, so I want to talk a little bit about the student debt situation, you guys. Joe Biden saying to the Hispanic caucus in Congress that he is like considering forgiving some portion of student debt for every borrower. His last promise on the campaign, for what it's worth, he made a number of different claims on student debt, but the last thing he promised was $10,000 per borrower. That would be grossly inadequate, but it would certainly be something. So we'll see if he's going to follow through on that. They've spent over a year at this point twiddling their thumbs and claiming that they are not sure if they have the legal authority to do that via executive action. It's obvious that they do have that authority, as we've covered a number of times, and other progressive outlets have too. But he apparently is looking at the polls for this November and starting to realize, oh, fuck, young voters and progressives are just not going to turn out. And why would they, when we have reneged on virtually all of our promises? So he's starting to panic a little bit. And apparently this is his response. Now, it obviously won't be enough. It might help them a little bit. But here's my argument, you guys. I think this is more about saving face than it is about saving the Democrats in November. I think that ship has largely sailed. I think what this is about is when the Democrats are inevitably criticized from all over for opening the door to Republicans this November and for not doing what they promised, they're going to get it from everyone, you guys. Like, even the partisan Democrats are going to be upset, like, hey, you opened the door for Republicans. And then you get the progressives hitting them from the left. I think this would be an excuse or something that Joe Biden can say in response to that. No, look, I did the student debt thing. See, it didn't even work. You progressives don't know what you're talking about. I think it's a face-saving exercise. I don't think that they actually think they have a shot in November. But in any case, obviously, it's better than nothing. Like, I'd rather have it happen than not happen for the sake of the borrowers out there. Millions, 40-some million borrowers in this country that would see some relief from that. So I'm going to show you guys a clip here. This is Briahna Joy Gray on Rising. She did her monologue the other day on the student debt situation. I think she has some very insightful things to say about the narrative and how both sides have sort of presented their arguments here and what kind of fights have broken out. I will say this is one of the clips I mentioned to start the show off, where in the middle, she has a little bit of a piece where she sort of frames it as taxpayer dollars would be paying for this debt relief. And I absolutely love Briahna. I think she's fantastic. I respect her. She's one of the best people in this industry, one of the best commentators out there. But I cannot stand it when I see progressives do that, you guys. It's handing home field advantage to your opponent to talk about this stuff in those terms. It's not taxpayer dollars that are paying for any federal spending. The spending has to come first by definition, and the taxes are simply an elimination of dollars. So, this only ever comes up on progressive issues. You never hear the how are you going to pay for it when it's about military spending or R&D checks for corporations or gigantic corporate tax breaks or any of that stuff. There's never any, oh God, the deficit, when that's the policy being discussed. But as soon as we want to provide housing to people or jobs to people or education to people or healthcare to people, then it's, oh dear Lord, the budget, right? So I just want to implore progressives out there not to give away your home field advantage by talking about this stuff as though it's tax to spend, because it's functionally inaccurate, and it also is rhetorically, strategically not the smartest thing to do. You're helping your opponent out. The only argument that conservatives have, you guys, they can't argue the actual policy. The only argument they have is, oh, but it's going to run up the deficit. They fearmonger incoherently about debts and deficits. It's the only argument they have that lands whatsoever. So we have to stop playing right into their hand by using that language. We just have to stop doing it. Okay. So anyway, that little tangent aside, the outside of that middle piece where she kind of frames it like we should tax the rich to pay for it, the rest of this is absolutely fantastic, and I think she's spot on. But we are going to come back and discuss the whole sort of thing, right? And why I think this rhetoric is so important. But this is Briahna Joy Gray dismantling the conservative arguments against student loan forgiveness, and discussing sort of how the fights seem to have broken out. We'll watch this and then come back and discuss.
Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Robbie, student debt cancellation has been the focus of a great deal of attention recently because it is one of a short list of action items Biden can actually implement without soliciting votes from Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. It's not because it's the program that helps the neediest. It's not even the way I'd address the student loan crisis if I had my druthers. We need to address the cost of college by making public colleges and universities tuition free. And heck, if I had my way, we'd also be offering retroactive payments to folks who've paid off their debts. But I don't run the world, unfortunately, and Biden is limited to doing what he can do using executive authority, which means student debt cancellation. Because over 90% of student debt is held by the federal government, he can use the same authority, which has enabled him and Trump to pause student debt, to cancel it outright. Over 44 million Americans have student debt, including a growing number of seniors, people exploited by for-profit colleges, and folks with debt from vocational degrees. Republicans and corporate Democrats have limited Biden's ability to provide relief to other populations in other ways. Say you're someone who would prefer to see aid go into families. I might agree. But with $225 billion in child care canceled, $225 billion in paid family leave canceled, and $200 billion in universal pre-K all killed, along with the human infrastructure bill, the best we can do for families is make sure that parents in those families aren't still paying their loans off as they save for their children's education. Now, the news this week is that it seemed for a second that Biden was actually coming around on this. After months of pretending he didn't have the authority to do what he was already doing, this week it was reported that Biden told the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that he's considering significant student debt cancellation, leading some to hope that not only was Biden finally getting serious about his campaign promise to cancel at least $10,000 of debt for everyone, but that he might actually cancel $50,000 or more. Now, his administration is already walking this back, but not soon enough to prevent all of the most corrupt big bank shills on Twitter from squealing like stuck pigs all day yesterday. Let's run through some of the worst takes, shall we? First up, founder of one of the world's leading private equity firms, 2012 presidential hopeful, and owner of an elevator for his cars, a real man of the people, Mitt Romney. Romney trended on Twitter yesterday for tweeting, quote, "Desperate polls call for desperate measures. Dems consider forgiving trillions in student loans. Other bribe suggestions? Forgive auto loans, forgive credit card debt, forgive mortgages, and put a wealth tax on the super rich to pay for it all? What could possibly go wrong?" What could go wrong? Not much from my perspective. Sounds like a good plan. Now, thoroughly dissecting everything wrong with this tweet would make this script longer than Grey's Anatomy, but let's just start with the obvious. Everything he describes here is good and should happen. Making good things happen for working people is not a bribe. That's just good politics. So, for example, credit card companies have been notoriously exploitative, and progressives like Bernie Sanders and AOC have proposed legislation to keep banks, like the ones Romney served when he was making his millions, from exploiting consumers with hidden fees and usurious interest rates, which average a whopping 17.71%. Mitt Romney is the kind of person who sees bailing out consumers as a problem, even while he's mum on the federal bailouts he's received. He tut-tuts helping students who can deduct a maximum of $2,000 of student loan interest from their taxes, and only then if you make under $60,000 a year, even while he can deduct the full interest on his $1 million home. It's good, apparently, when the laws are designed to cut the rich a break, but God forbid working families get the same benefit. As rising guest Andrew Perez pointed out, if forgiving student debt was a massive giveaway to the rich, politicians would have done it already. This caller into C-SPAN this week put it perfectly.
But I have a different take on this.
Okay.
I think student loan debt should be wiped out for this reason. 2 years ago, they passed the Paycheck Protection Program in Congress. Businesses, which are people, they got billions of dollars. Then they used them billions of dollars, which wasn't their money, to pay their workforce for 6 months, and then it was extended. They turned around and forgave their debt, and they also let them keep all their profits. So why is it good enough for the business but not good enough for the student? That's my question. That's called fairness and equality.
Adam Minsky.
Well said, sir. Well said. Now, to be clear, Romney's far from the only hypocrite in the bunch. Tom Cotton, self-styled working man's hero, asked, quote, why should a trucker who didn't go to college have to pay off a lawyer's student loan debt? But if he knew anything about trucking, he'd know that student debt is a problem for truck drivers too. Did you know that the vocations corporate conservatives pretend to respect often require real training, and that training costs money? Did you know that the average truck driving school requires folks to pay between $3,000 and $7,000 up front? And that's not including housing, meals, and transportation. Cotton doesn't want to pay for truckers to get an education, so he's pretending that they will be paying for a lawyer's degree. But the reality is, of course, that nobody is paying in a traditional sense. What we're talking about is federally held debt being canceled. You know how no one is paying right now because of the student debt moratorium? Cancellation simply means that status quo is made permanent. And to the extent that anyone should pay to permanently fix the underlying problems with the system by making public education and vocational programs free, well, let's revisit one of the excellent suggestions from Romney's tweet: tax the rich. Remember, Elizabeth Warren's modest wealth tax involved a 2-cent tax on every dollar earned over $50 million in wealth. Just 2 cents on a dollar over 50 million. If a billionaire dropping $44 billion on an app doesn't suggest to you that a modest wealth tax is in order to make sure we have a well-educated populace that can, actually help build the Mars colony we're all dreaming about, I'm not sure what will. Now, finally, here's my favorite take, this time offered up by another faux populist, J.D. Vance. A man dripping with so much contempt for poor white people that even the great Glenn Close couldn't reform the movie adaptation of his life story. Now, according to Vance, forgiving student debt is a massive windfall to the rich, to the college educated, and most of all, the corrupt university administrators of America. Okay, now, if there were ever an argument to fund free public college and hobble private institutions like Yale, Vance's alma mater, this complete turd of bad logic Vance is dropping here is it. Now, I want you to really lean in, really listen to what I'm about to say. I think you'll get it intuitively. Rich people don't take out debt to go to college. Rich people don't have to. Think about it. Interest rates when I was going to law school were about 8%. Why on earth would anyone who could pay the sticker price for school, about $180,000 at the time, sign up for an interest rate that would have them pay over $80,000 more than the cost of tuition over the course of an average 10-year repayment period? And to be clear, most people take much longer than 10 years. Millions of Americans who happen not to have rich parents are paying more for their education than the kids whose parents can pay up front. Vance's argument ends up amounting to saying, I only think that rich kids should become doctors and lawyers. I only think rich kids should get a 4-year degree. And that's not the populist egalitarian argument he thinks it is. That's the argument of someone who got the benefit of a Yale education and wants to pull the ladder up behind him. That is an argument you should ignore. Now, Biden's latest remarks do seem to be a departure from what he said in the past, and I understand why folks are hopeful. But I am a student of Biden logic, and Biden historically subscribes to the school of reverse empathy, e.g., it was tough for me, so it should be tough for you too. During the campaign, in a move that I found to be shocking in its cruelty, he used his deceased son's medical bills as a justification for why we shouldn't have Medicare for all. He is an expert in weaponized empathy, using the fact that he can relate to voters through shared tragedy to justify not doing all he could to help them. This is why student debt cancellation advocates should not let up now. This is the moment to put the pressure on. The fact that all of these corporate-funded politicians who suckle at the teat of big banks are squealing means activists, workers, students, and their parents have finally turned up the heat. Private loan servicers, banks, and others who are making a profit off of this regressive education tax are lobbying politicians hard to keep this corrupt system in place. And the government has an interest in keeping education and healthcare out of reach so it can continue to drive young people into the armed forces, not out of a sense of duty or patriotism, not because they believe we are fighting just wars, but because they don't know how else to get healthcare or to go to school. Tom Cotton and Romney are right. There is a class war afoot, but it's not being waged between lawyers and truckers. It's millionaire investment firm founders, come politicians, against you and your children's future.
I thought that was a pretty fantastic monologue with that one little tax dollar exception in the middle. And just to hit on that before we get into the rest of it, for those who don't know, you guys, it is, I said this before the clip, but it's, we are giving our opponents an advantage when we use their framing and their rhetoric in this way. So when we argue for progressive policies that would spend on poor and working class people, that would actually shift economic power towards poor and working class people, when we're talking about those policies, the arguments against them fall entirely short. So our opponents are forced into a corner where the only argument they have that works, despite it being incoherent and factually detached from reality, the only argument that they have is, well, but it's going to raise taxes, so you're going to be paying for other people's shit. And then they do the whole Red Scare thing, right? Government's going to take your toothbrush, right? You have to pay for everyone else's education through your hard-earned tax dollars, and they fearmonger about it that way. And again, that's factually detached from reality, as MMT shows us. It's incredibly disingenuous because even if the tax to spend rhetoric was actually factually correct, any progressive tax system would not have poor people paying for rich people shit. So it's on so many different levels. It's insidious, right? It is odious. It is harmful to our movement, and we need to stop handing over home field advantage to our opponents by engaging in their framing and their rhetoric. And I would just beg Briahna Joy Gray. There's no chance in hell she's going to watch my live stream, but I would just beg Briahna Joy Gray, please, 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 please stop using that kind of framing. Call it public dollars. That's what it is, right? And all that it is decisions being made by Congress who have the power of the purse granted to them in the Constitution, okay? So they're simply making political decisions, what to spend on, what not to spend on. Budgets express priorities, okay? So when we give $33 billion in defense aid to Ukraine and refuse to cancel student debt or provide housing or healthcare or education to our own citizens, when we refuse to address the problems in our justice system, when we refuse to address the climate crisis that we've created, on and on and on, all of that is a political decision by Congress. So that's how we have to frame it. Why are you choosing not to help people domestically? Why are you choosing to allow people who tried to do the right thing and go get an education so they could get a good job and better society and provide for society and all this shit that we're taught growing up, right? The people who did what they were told they had to do to get along okay, and now they're drowning in debt. Why are we making that political choice? If we make that the discussion, then their only argument is the bitter thing, right? what Briahna was talking about there, the weaponized empathy, the inverse empathy, the I had to pay my debt off, so you should have to pay your the bitter, resentful political position of I don't think anyone should ever have it better than me, right? If you force them to actually make that the core of their argument here, they're going to get absolutely mollywopped. But when they get to sit back and prey on our economic misunderstandings and say your hard-earned tax dollars are going to go to this, then they win. So this is why we at RP, and I'll once again plug realprogressives.org for educational content on MMT. The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton is a wonderful primer into MMT if you're new to the concept. But this is why we are always talking about MMT, because it is so critically important to how all of these political discussions are framed and how we think of public policy and public spending, etc. Okay, so that's my quick little rant on that. Briahna, please, God, I absolutely love you. I think you do fantastic work. Please stop using the taxpayer rhetoric. This goes to a lot of progressive commentators who I largely agree with, who will on occasion use this kind of rhetoric. And we have a clip of Bernie doing it later here too. So, I'm not trying to come down on anybody. I view these people as largely my allies, but I have to say something. I'm so tired of this rhetoric. It makes me want to pull my hair out. One of these weeks, I'm going to get up here and just be straight up bald, you guys, because I've seen too much taxpayer dollars. I'm going to fucking pull my hair out. Okay. Anyway, to get into the rest of the stuff where I think she was really spot on in her analysis of some of these conservative arguments in opposition to forgiving or canceling student debt. I put a tweet up about one of the things she was talking about, and I'm going to go ahead and oh, I'm sorry, I don't have my screen shared. I was unprepared today. Here we go. I just said, ever notice how the politicians and pundits who incessantly support cutting taxes for the rich and giving them handouts are the same politicians and pundits claiming student debt forgiveness is a handout to the rich? And she kind of touched on that rhetoric, right? The very same people who endlessly serve the billionaire class are suddenly like, well, why are you going to give a handout to the rich by canceling student debt? And to Briahna's point, the wealthy very seldom take out loans to go to college, you guys, because why would they want to pay interest on something when they could just like write a check for it to start with? So that argument is so incoherent and not rooted in reality, detached from reality. But they will try to make that argument anyway, despite how contradictory it is to most of their political beliefs and most of the things that they support, which are completely centered around serving the billionaire class. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to care about, oh, you're giving a handout to billionaires. I mean, give me a break. It's absolutely outrageous. It should reveal how clownish and unserious their positions are to start with, right? So, I think she is spot on about the way that conservatives have responded to this, and it's kind of it harkens back to one of the things I was saying earlier, where if you actually make this about the politics here, if you actually have to sit here and discuss the policy, it's such a no-brainer, you guys. I mean, it's just like Medicare for all or tuition-free college. She also made a great point, and actually, let me sidetrack here for a minute because I really wanted to make a point to go down this path. One thing that I see a lot is when people do the bitter thing, I worked hard for years and paid off my loans. One of the responses I give is, well, I think you should be, reimbursed for that. I think this should be retroactive. I don't think we should just cancel currently outstanding loans. I think we should also cancel, like reimburse people for what they've had to pay go back however many years. This has been a serious problem, at least a couple decades, if not more. So that's one response, right? No, you're not left out of this. I actually mean everybody should have access to a free education. And if you had to pay for it in the past, I think you should be reimbursed for it. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, if your political position is entirely rooted in nobody should have it better than me, then what are we even doing here, you guys? Why do we even have politics? Why is someone like that even engaging in politics? If your whole thing is, I don't want the next generation to have it better than me, then what's the point? What are we all doing here? Right? Like, that's the whole core thing of the American dream, supposedly, right? The stories that we tell ourselves about America. Right? Well, your next generation will have it better. Your kids will have it better than you if you work hard. That's what we tell ourselves. And And yet these people have come out and just gone totally mask off and told on themselves when it comes to their positions. And no, I don't think anyone else should have it any easier than me. I think any suffering I had to endure, any hardship I had to endure, I think everyone else should have to endure it till the end of fucking eternity. Because otherwise I had to endure something that you didn't. Get off my lawn back in my day, right? It's just, that's how it comes off. But anyhow, I wanted to make the point that one of the things you can say to disarm that is, well, if I had my way, now Biden's not going to do this, but if I had my way, you'd be reimbursed. I'm not leaving you out of this. I don't care if you paid 20 years ago, had your loans paid off, you should be reimbursed. And I think that part is not often enough, inserted into the conversation. And by the way, the only thing that they could squawk about then is, well, but I'm getting reimbursed less than the people are getting then they'd be making our point for us that the price for college has gone through the roof over the last couple of decades, largely, by the way, thanks to people like Joe Biden, and the financial institutions who have stood to benefit from those costs going through the roofs, and the colleges, of course, who operate more like corporations nowadays than they do institutions of education. So anyhow, this has sparked kind of a shit show. Joe Biden, saying he's considering canceling or forgiving some portion of student debt. It has really sparked a shit show. And I also want to drive home. This is another really important point, you guys. So if this does happen, and again, I've made clear, whatever he does is going to be grossly inadequate. Even if it's $50K per, we should cancel all of it, reimburse everyone who's paid their loans, and we should make colleges and universities tuition free going forward. So even if he does 50, that will still be a conservative compromise by from my perspective. But it's very much worth pointing out, even though that's an inadequate policy, it's very much worth pointing out why he is doing it. It is not out of the goodness of his fucking heart, you guys. It's not because he actually believes it's the right policy. If either of those were true, he would have done it in his first week. We would have had this done almost a year and a half ago if he actually was intent on doing this. What it demonstrates is that when progressives fall in line, they're comfortable. When we don't fall in line, it actually forces them to do, again, I don't want to overstate this, but it actually forces them to do something. Do you honestly think Joe Biden would be even talking about this if he wasn't looking at polls that looked absolutely disastrous for his party? No. If all of us progressives were falling in line in this moment, and he was looking at polls that said we're going to be just fine in November, or even we're going to do well in November, if his approval rating wasn't tanking, right? Like, if it didn't look like Trump was going to be fucking president again, like it does today look like Trump is going to be president again, do you think Biden would be talking about this? No. His first year in 3-4 months it betrays any notion that he would be doing this otherwise, because he would have done it earlier. So I think it's worth noting that when progressives are told to get in line for Democrats, otherwise we won't get anything that we want, one thing we should point out is it is only and specifically when we don't get in line that they actually feel pressured to do a goddamn thing. So I think that element is also not often enough discussed. And to that point, huge shout out to Levi for the super chat. Thank you, Levi. Realprogressives.org for more information about us. Realprogressives.org/donate if you want to help us out, or you can leave a super chat like Levi just did, or a super sticker, I think it is. Huge thanks to anybody who can contribute. We really appreciate it. On the note of what I was just talking about, I want to show you guys this graphic that CNN put up. Okay, now you'll see here, it's basically Biden's report card. So they give him a green check next to American Rescue Plan and infrastructure. Now, those are stretches, okay? They're very much stretches, because neither of those programs was anywhere close to as robust as as Biden even said he was going to do, let alone anywhere close to as robust as we actually need. So both of those green check marks are a little bit suspect to me in a sense, right? They're a little bit of an exaggeration. But you see all these other issues, right? Has he addressed gun reform? Has he addressed immigration? No, in fact, immigration's a pretty extraordinary one. He said that day one, he would undo every executive order that Donald Trump put in place. You guys, were over a year in, and a lot of Trump's policies at the border are still in place, okay? Has he expanded Medicare and Medicaid? No. In fact, he's worked to try to privatize them. Has he addressed the climate crisis? No. In fact, he has tried to lease more more land for drilling and more permits for drilling throughout his first year and a half. Has he addressed criminal justice reform? No, not at all. In fact, he has provided more subsidies for police than Donald Trump was providing. Has he addressed voting rights? No, he has not. He likes to talk a lot about unions. Has he passed the PRO Act or used his bully pulpit to force the PRO Act through? No, he has not, right? Has he done anything tangibly to support? You could argue that the NLRB has been a little bit stronger under him than under Trump. Fine, that's fine. The officials might have been a little bit more willing to address illegal behavior than previous officials. But you guys, some of the funding has been gutted at the NLRB under Biden's watch, okay? Now, supposedly on his next budget, that's going to change. But you guys see the point. Oh, on issue after issue, he comes nowhere close to what he has promised. Nowhere fucking close to what he has promised. Okay. So that's also worth pointing out, is that when progressives actually hold out and actually, display our disdain for the party in their inaction, that is the only time that they feel forced to do even tepidly progressive things. And it totally, betrays the narrative that the mainstream likes to push and the establishment like to push, that you have to fall in line for Democrats or else you're not going to get anything that you want. It's a total misrepresentation of how power actually works in DC and in our political process, right? So I want to show you guys a thread here. This is a somewhat of a reverberating effect on the whole student debt situation that I don't think a lot of people talk about. Huge shout out, by the way, to Jules, our COO, who sent me this tweet thread and brought this to my attention. This is by Michelle Miller. I'm somewhat loath to get so personal, but I feel like I need to tell this story. My mother died in December of 2020 with what I believed at the time to be $40,000 in student loan debt. When I went to college, the deal my mom made with me was that we'd split the loan payback. I paid my portion back in about 10 years. We owed $15,000 each. I didn't know that she was never able to pay her portion back. I discovered she had the debt in 2019 when I had to help her out of a predatory refinancing scam. I asked if I could take over the loans. My very stubborn mother refused, so I let it go, but held some money back in my own savings in case she'd eventually let me help. Fall of 2020, two things happened. She became ill quite suddenly due to the impacts of botched medical care 30 years prior, and the company she worked for started closing down departments. She was worried they'd shut down hers before she could retire the following year. She barely had enough money to make it through her retirement years. The difference between poverty and doing all right was the $400 monthly payment on those student loans. She told me it'd be okay because she was good at being broke. She was very sick the last week we spent together. I didn't know she was dying. I thought we were figuring out how to get some care for her and fix up the house. I asked if she'd let me take the loans over. She said it was a gift she'd be proud to give. She needed to do it herself. This is what we talked about the last week my mom was alive. Loans. Student fucking loans. I am telling this story because every time I see someone say erasing debt is a gift to elites, I think about my mom, a woman who never saw her way out of the working class. After she died, my dear friend Dania and I went through her papers to deal with all the post-death practicalities no one ever talks about. I found her loan papers. She had lied to me about what she owed. It was $80,000, not $40,000, on about $15,000 of debt. The company forgave it immediately. This thread is going bananas, so I need to mute. And she goes on to plug something there. So you guys, how are you not touched by that story? Imagine, what do you even fucking say, you guys? Imagine how that woman felt as she knew she was dying. And she had tried to give this gift to her child, the gift of an education, at least partly help, right? Imagine how she felt knowing that her daughter was going to find out about that lie and potentially inherit that debt. Imagine that being your last week on Earth or however long on Earth. Imagine your last interactions with your loved ones having to be about debt and knowing that you have held this secret out of love for them that they're soon to find out. I just can't even, that's a tearjerker if I've ever seen one. How can you even describe how horrific that is, that we have created a society like that? So to those who would dare take the morally repugnant position that you don't think student loans should be forgiven, I would implore you to read that story and the millions of other similar stories, and perhaps reevaluate your position. So just really, really, like I said, it's a tearjerker. That's that kind of a story, but it's indicative of how we treat the poor and working class in this country. We don't give a shit about them. We care about the financial institutions who get to prey upon them. We have a story later about Wall Street securities fraud, kind of along the same notes. I want to show you guys here that clip I talked about with Bernie. Bernie did. This is another one of those, to his credit, and I'm also going to critique him. Okay, to his credit, he did push Biden, and he said the time for talk is over. This is a little bit more about unions, but I think he means it more broadly than just about labor issues. So credit to Bernie for pushing Biden and for acknowledging the inaction. I think that is credit worthy. But he also uses taxpayer dollars in reference to how we would pay for a lot of these progressive programs in his clip. And you guys, I literally know for a fact that Bernie knows better. I know for a fact. Bernie's chief economist on the Senate Budgetary Committee for a long time was Stephanie Kelton. Stephanie Kelton is one of the faces, the modern faces of MMT. Stephanie wrote the primer, The Deficit Myth, that everybody references in terms of MMT, or at least surface level MMT. So I know for a fact that he knows taxes do not fund federal spending. I know that for a fact. And yet he continues to engage in the rhetoric. And it makes me want to pull my fucking hair out. But I don't think it's like malicious, you guys. Obviously, I think with a lot of these progressives, the taxpayer dollars thing is just so deeply ingrained into their vocabulary that they have spent decades hearing and discussing these issues with those terms, that it can be very hard to break those habits. So I again, it's hard for me to square, because I know Bernie knows and understands this stuff, and I know he understands the strategic value in using accurate language here, and yet he continues to say tax dollars. Drives me nuts. But the rest of this clip, again, just like the Briahna Joy Gray clip, is fantastic. This is Bernie on the Senate floor pushing Joe Biden to act instead of talk about it. And again, we give the caveat about the taxpayer dollars thing. We're going to get into some MMT here shortly. But this is Bernie telling Biden that the time for talk is over.
Historic union victory was achieved nearly 1 month ago by Amazon workers in Staten Island. In fact, Amazon cannot even come to grips with the reality that workers in Staten Island won their union election fair and square. In order to stall the process out, Amazon's lawyers have appealed that election result to the NLRB. Their strategy, as is often the strategy of corporate interests confronting unions, is to use their incredible resources, their unending amount of money, to stall, and stall. Amazon is one of the most profitable and one of the most powerful corporations in America. It is also one of the largest employers in our country, with close to 1 million workers. We are talking about a company that is owned by Mr. Jeff Bezos, the second wealthiest person in America, worth $170 billion. Let me repeat that. He's not the wealthiest. He's only the second wealthiest, worth $170 billion. Jeff Bezos has enough money to own a $500 million yacht. $500 million yacht. He has enough money to own a $23 million mansion right here in Washington, D.C., which has 25 bathrooms. And yet, even though Mr. Bezos can afford all of these mansions and his $500 million yacht and his rocket ship, Mr. Bezos refuses to pay his workers at Amazon decent wages, decent benefits, or provide decent working conditions. The American people want action from the president, they want action from Congress, and we have got to deliver. I sent a letter to President Biden urging him to sign an executive order to prohibit companies like Amazon that have violated labor laws from receiving federal contracts paid for by the taxpayers of America. Let's be clear. Amazon has already been penalized more than $75 million for breaking federal discrimination and labor laws. To date, there are currently 59 unfair labor cases against Amazon pending at the National Labor Relations Board. It is my view that the time for talk is over. The time for action is now. Taxpayer dollars should not go to companies like Amazon and multi-billionaires like Jeff Bezos, who repeatedly break the law. No government, not the federal government, not the state government, and not the city government, should be handing out corporate welfare to union busters and labor law violators.
So again, there you guys, the taxpayer rhetoric drives me up a fucking wall, but he is absolutely correct. And this is one thing I do want to clear up a little bit about MMT, you guys, because I think we often are misunderstood on the taxpayer thing, just in the sense that nobody is saying that public dollars should go to that. We're just objecting to the terminology. So instead, all that Bernie has to do is say public dollars should not go to the second wealthiest man in the world. And we all are in full, total agreement, and we're not handing the framing over to our opponents or engaging in the same framing as our opponents, right? We're not giving them a gift. We're not arming their arguments. If we just change a couple of little words here and there. So anyway, good on Bernie for pressuring Biden from the left and acknowledging the inaction on behalf of Biden's administration. But the taxpayer rhetoric thing will never stop driving me nuts. I want to give a huge shout out to Virginia and Mark. And is it Surus? I can barely read it. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but huge thank you to all of you for the super chats. Once again, you guys, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker in the live chat. You can go to realprogressives.org/donate to help us out. We are a nonprofit and every little bit does help. We very much appreciate the support there. So as I mentioned, I want to because I just showed you guys a couple of clips that I largely agree with, but want to critique from an MMT framing perspective. I did want to read you guys a piece on MMT. This is by Dr. Fadl Kaboub, who regular viewers will recognize. He's done a number of things with Real Progressives, from Steve Grumbine's Macro and Cheese podcast to RP Live events that we have done. Fadl is wonderful when it comes to communicating economic concepts. He teaches at Denison, and he wrote a piece on Stephanie Kelton's Substack, sort of addressing some of the things that some critics have had to say lately about MMT in Sri Lanka. So he says, no, MMT didn't wreck Sri Lanka. Debunking Bloomberg with Fadl Kaboub. Last week, Bloomberg touted an opinion piece written by one of its regular columnists, claiming that Sri Lanka was the first company in the world to try MMT and that the experiment has brought the country to ruin. A few days later, the Washington Post republished the article, so it garnered a fair bit of attention. Unfortunately, the essay offers little insight into what's really gone wrong in Sri Lanka. But hey, editors and writers have discovered that MMT drives clicks. So there's no dearth of efforts to shoehorn MMT into almost anything. A number of people sent me the link and asked me to respond. I sat down to do just that, but then I remembered that MMT economist Fadl Kaboub talks about Sri Lanka in some of his presentations and that he's been studying the country for years. Fadl is an associate professor of economics at Denison University and the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. He brings deeper knowledge of the Sri Lankan economy and the policy decisions that have paved the way for their current predicament. So I reached out to invite him to respond to Mihir Sharma's main claims about the so-called MMT experiment in Sri Lanka. Sharma's big claim is that two cherished heterodox theories became official policy in Sri Lanka, and within 2 years, they brought the country to the brink of default and ruin. The government has halted payments of its foreign debt and warned that it may default. Import prices are surging. It's hard for people to buy food and fuel. There are periodic blackouts and rationing. Inflation is close to 19%, and the central bank has recently doubled interest rates. Sharma acknowledges that there are structural factors at play, and he concedes that the pandemic hammered the nation's tourism sector, while the Russian invasion of Ukraine made everything worse. But he argues that the deeper problem is that the ruling elite turned Sri Lanka's policymaking over to cranks. One of the heterodox theories that is supposedly responsible for the crisis is MMT. What follows is a lightly edited transcript of my Q&A with Professor Kaboom. Question. Sharma claims that Sri Lanka is the first country in the world to reference MMT officially as a justification for money printing. He blames former central bank governor Wilagamajdan Lakshman. I apologize for any butchered names in this, you guys, for listening to monetary cranks who convinced him that nobody needs to worry about debt sustainability as long as you increase the proportion of domestic debt relative to debt denominated in foreign currency. Is there anything in MMT that says that as long as you increase the proportion of domestic debt, you can print money without worrying about debt sustainability or inflation? Fadl's response. When I first read the statement of Sri Lanka's central bank governor, Mr. Wilagamajdan Lakshman, back in 2020, it was very clear to me that he does not understand the basic MMT insights. He was under the impression that what matters in terms of monetary sovereignty is the proportion of sovereign currency debt relative to domestic currency debt, and that there was no need to rethink the foundation of the economic development model that his country has used since the late 1970s. Governor Lakshman focused on the proportion of debt, but never questioned what the external debt was fueling, and never articulated how a higher proportion of domestic debt was going to build economic resilience in Sri Lanka. MMT economists have been very clear all along that a country's fiscal spending capacity is constrained by the risk of inflation, which is determined by the level of productive capacity, availability of real resources, productivity, skills, logistics, supply chains, etc., and the level of abusive market power enjoyed by key players in the economy. Cartels, exclusive import license holders, shell companies, cross-border traffickers, speculators, current government procurement systems, etc. Therefore, increasing a country's fiscal policy space must be done via strategic investments to boost productive capacity and regulation of abusive market power. Sri Lanka's economic policy choices pre-pandemic and Russia-Ukraine war do not even come close to what MMT economists would have suggested. I just want to take a brief pause here to mention that what he was just discussing there is very much applicable to the United States as well, where we have seen price increases throughout the latter half of the pandemic. And it's pretty obvious that is just market power, as Fadl might describe it. It's I would say price gouging, right? It's companies that have record profits that are, not just passing the costs of supply chains down to their the havoc wreaked on supply chains down to their customers, but passing more than that down to their customers. And I always fall back on the example of the Kroger CEO who boasted about this to investors. He said, we're passing more than the increased costs along to the customer, which means we're basically price gouging because we know that customers right now are expecting an increase in prices. So we're going to take advantage of that expectation for our own profiteering, right? So I just wanted to make clear that same dynamic that Fadl's describing, where the productive capacity combined with market power in the hands of those who are going to abuse it is likely to increase your prices, to create increased prices. So that is also true of the United States, and I just wanted to note that before we carry on here on this article. As I will explain below, Sri Lanka has three structural economic weaknesses that were systemically reinforced via mainstream economic policies. First, the lack of food sovereignty. Second, the lack of energy sovereignty. And third, low value-added exports. These deficiencies imply that accelerating the country's economic engines leads to more pressure on its external balance, a weaker exchange rate, higher inflationary pressures, especially food, fuel, medicine, and basic necessities. And as a result, it leads to the classic trap of external debt. Here's how it all started. Sri Lanka, like many countries in the global south, began the liberalization of its economy in 1977 and adopted a classic IMF-style economic development. You might recognize the IMF from the Ukraine situation right now, very prevalent all around the world, model based on exports, foreign direct investments, tourism, and remittances. This development model remained tamed during the Civil War, 1983 to 2009, but it was fully unleashed in 2009. And that is when external debt began to skyrocket, going from 16 billion in 2008 to nearly 56 billion in 2019. The value of the Sri Lankan rupee followed from 114 to dropped. Excuse me, guys. I'm saying wrong words left and right here. I apologize. From 114 to 178. Thanks to a massive increase in government subsidies and transfers reaching more than 30% of government spending in recent years, Sri Lanka struggled to keep inflation below 5%. Yet economists celebrated Sri Lanka's great achievements with an average growth rate exceeding 5% in the decade after the Civil War, and a real per capita GDP growth putting the country officially in the upper middle income economy category. Sri Lanka was following the mainstream economic development model like a good student. In the decade starting in 2009, exports grew from 9.3 to 19.1 billion. Tourism quadrupled from 0.5 to 2.5 million visitors annually. FDI inflows quadrupled by 2018 to a record 1.6 billion, and remittances doubled to nearly 7 billion annually. These are the four engines of Sri Lanka's economic growth, but they are also the engines driving the country deeper into the structural traps of food and energy dependency and specialization in low-value added exports. Here is how these engines constitute a trap. An increase in tourism induces more food and energy imports. An increase in remittances means more brain drain. An increase in low-value added exports induces more imports of capital, intermediate goods, fuel, etc. And an increase in low-value added FDI does the same, plus the repatriation of profits out of Sri Lanka. On a global scale, these neo-colonial economic traps have suctioned $152 trillion from the global south since 1960. Okay? So I'm not going to read the whole thing to you guys, although I do encourage you to go check out that piece if you're interested. It's on stephaniekelton.substack.com. The rest of that discussion was fantastic as well. Really encourage you to follow Stephanie and Fadl's work more broadly as well. The Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity is a fantastic resource for economics, and Fadl is a great communicator of these concepts. So I wanted to bring you guys at least a portion of that piece, because I think it also ties into the United States situation, and we were just talking MMT, so it seemed a nice little transition. But if you take anything away, please understand that it is always about resources. That is ultimately what matters. Okay. And the financing of it is often sort of overplayed, I suppose you could say, in a sense, right? We talk about the dollars instead of the resources. And I think Fadl gets to that point quite well. So a lot of people, and this is the other point, you guys, MMT, it's like that Gandhi quote, right? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then they argue against you, and then you've won. So MMT is working its way up, right? At first, we all were ignored. I mean, when I was very little was when MMT was founded in the 90s, or kind of first came to be in the 90s. But you know, it was ignored for years and years and years, and then it was laughed at for years and years and years. And now they are responding quite viscerally to it and quite angrily to it, and trying to debunk it and trying to come up with examples that disprove it. So I think that is us moving along that spectrum that Gandhi sort of described. I think the fact that they feel the need to address it at this point is progress for us MMTers. So I'm excited to see this, and I'm excited to see people like Fadl and Stephanie gaining more public notoriety and getting their arguments out there in this way. So just really encourage anybody who might not be familiar with MMT, please do go to realprogressives.org. We have all sorts of great educational content on the topic. Our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine's podcast on Saturdays, Macro and Cheese, they talk about all sorts of stuff, but it's sort of centered around an MMT understanding, and they talk a great deal of MMT on that podcast. We have all sorts of articles on the topic. We have all sorts of podcasts and interviews on the topic. So I just encourage everybody, realprogressives.org. If you're not familiar with MMT, please go follow Fadl's work, Stephanie's work, Steve's work, our work at Real Progressives, etc. So I want to briefly touch here on, we're going to do Manchin's corruption. That's what we're going to do. Joe Manchin has yet another scandal about corruption out there. He's a pretty well understood corrupt guy. Let me rephrase that. He's pretty well understood to be a massively corrupt guy. All the stuff with his daughter, price gouging on insulin, and she was forced out, took like a $30 million golden parachute or something to leave the pharmaceutical company in West Virginia that she was previously an executive at, if I have that correct. She was either on the board or an executive, one of the two. Anyway, Manchin, of course, supporting that company with his role in Congress and the industry more broadly. Manchin known to take all sorts of money from fossil fuel companies, from banks, from all of the most nefarious actors in our political process. And he is caught here yet again in another political scandal, this one kind of local to West Virginia. We have a clip here. This is More Perfect Union, you guys. I'm using their work all the time. They're a fantastic source at More Perfect US on Twitter. If you want to follow their work, they dove into some of the details here on Joe Manchin's corruption. So we'll watch this, come back and discuss.
Manchin, the senator, is also a wealthy mining executive, and he sells all his coal to this one power plant here in Granttown, West Virginia. A new investigation reveals that for 30 years, Manchin has been using his public office to benefit that plant, all while getting a cut of the plant's revenue. This arrangement has helped make him a millionaire, in part by forcing people in his own state to pay higher electricity rates. It's a classic story of conflict of interest and public corruption. This is how he did it.
A livable future!
He does not care about our future. He cares about his future as a millionaire and as an oligarch.
You're harming more than West Virginia. You're harming the whole system.
In the 1980s, Joe Manchin owned several gob mines,
which stands for garbage of bituminous.
It is the dirtiest kind of coal you can burn.
It's really a filthy product. It's full of rock, clay, things that should never enter an incinerator.
As the New York Times uncovered, Manchin used his new position as state senator to win an air pollution waiver so the Granttown power plant near his district was allowed to burn gob, which produces high levels of the toxin sulfur dioxide. In private, Manchin then made a deal to sell his gob to Granttown in exchange for a cut of the plant's revenue. Despite the conflict of interest, Manchin then helped pass tax credits to subsidize power plants that burn gob in West Virginia.
It's poisoned our water, it's poisoned our air, it's poisoned our citizens. And Joe's made money off of it.
As governor, Manchin worked behind the scenes to push for electricity rate increases on people who relied on power from Granttown.
He's helped make sure that this plant gets rate increases to pay for electricity that actually isn't made as cheaply as other forms of energy, including wind and solar, which are also able to be made right here in West Virginia.
Ratepayers were forced to spend millions of dollars in excess fees in one of the poorest states in the country, and Manchin personally benefited from all of it.
Making money off things that you are in charge of, totally immoral, unethical, and all kinds of other words.
Since 2016 alone, Granttown has cost West Virginia utility Mon Power $117 million more than it would have to buy power from other sources. Later, when the EPA proposed
the first ever national mercury and air toxic standards for power plants,
Manchin, now a United States senator, sponsored legislation giving regulatory authority over coal ash to states to get around the laws.
We have this agency stepping way beyond its boundaries, further than our founding fathers ever intended.
He looks at himself in the mirror when he's looking for that inside guy, As the senator, he's the one who's getting rich from the coal company, and as the owner of a coal company, he's the one who's getting the breaks from the senator.
Fast forward to today. For 3 decades, Manchin has made millions as the gob supplier to the plant, while simultaneously getting a cut of the Granttown plant's revenue. That plant is the last in West Virginia that still burns gob, and would be put out of business by the new climate legislation proposed in President Biden's Build Back Better plan. To squeeze out the last profits before a possible closure, the plant's owners tried to force the utility company to buy out its contract, which lasts till 2036. By November, it was clear that the state regulators who would have had to approve that buyout were skeptical. And a month later, Manchin announced that he was opposed to the Build Back Better bill altogether, effectively killing it.
And I cannot vote to continue with this piece of legislation. I just can't.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care what anybody thinks. He doesn't care what his constituents think. He doesn't care what environmentalists think. All he cares about is making more money for himself and his crony friends.
The things that happen at this coal plant and across our state only make our water dirtier, our soil dirtier, our air dirtier. And I don't want to have to tell my grandkids or even my kids or even myself in a few years that I can't live here because it's not safe.
Somebody hurting us far too long. And we won't be silent.
So hardly surprising to find Joe Manchin, sticking his hands in the piggy jar again. This one's a pretty brazen one, right? He legislates in ways that help an industry, and then he sort of monopolizes that industry. And of course, it's like the dirtiest kind of coal that you can burn as well. So it's like it's a layered thing here, right? He's also destroying the environment while he's getting rich. Unreal. And from some of the clips I see in West Virginia, I'm often confused. Like, how does this dude how does he get fucking elected? How does he get elected? I mean, am I seeing such a small portion of what people actually think in West Virginia of Joe Manchin? I mean, they're a right-wing state, so the fact that he's a Democrat is odd. Like, that they keep electing a Democrat is odd. But then all the rhetoric I ever see actually coming from West Virginia is very pro-working class and very anti-corruption and, very like pro-labor and pro-worker. So it's just, I don't know if he's just effectively spinning himself as the lesser evil to enough people to keep getting elected or what, but it just seems to totally run counter. And not that this is unique to West Virginia. I mean, I recognize that, we're as I covered last week, we're often voting between a giant douche and a turd sandwich when it comes to these congressional elections. But it's just fascinating to me that of all states, like a state that West Virginia might have the claim to be the state that has been most railroaded by neoliberalism. And they're certainly right there, right? They're in those few handful of states or whatever that kind of could lay claim to, like, we've had it worse over the last half century or so. And yet they keep voting for, like, Joe Manchin is the epitome of neoliberalism, the absolute epitome of it, the epitome of corruption. They keep voting for it. The epitome of nepotism. Look at what happened with his daughter. They keep voting for it. Really outrageous stuff here. And I don't mean to, by the way, just to be really, really clear, that's just me being confused. I don't mean to like blame the voters here. If you don't vote in West Virginia, I don't blame you for not voting. You going to vote for that shithead, or are you going to vote for a Republican? I mean, like, what are you going to do, right? Giant douche turd sandwich. So I'm not trying to sit here and voter blame. I'm fascinated by the dynamic in West Virginia in particular, because, of all states, it should be, patently obvious there that Joe Manchin's politics are harmful to the vast majority of people, although they are quite beneficial to him, as we're finding out here. Great coverage from More Perfect Union at More Perfect US on Twitter. If you want to learn more about the labor movement and keep up on strikes and things there, we have a labor update as usual coming up a little bit later that is also got a great deal of More Perfect Union coverage. So I do want to talk just briefly here, you guys, about the rhetoric, the narratives surrounding Elon and Twitter. And regular viewers will notice a theme here, because I'm starting to see this all over politics and foreign policy discussions, etc., election discussions, all of it. This sort of like weird false dichotomy that people engage in when they talk about an issue that is causing conflict. So if I express hesitation that Elon Musk is actually going to somehow improve free speech on online platforms, if I express hesitation about that, if I express hesitation about billionaires continuing to buy up such important institutions in our society as like major social media outlets that we use to communicate and share information, if I express some hesitance about that, or a lack of faith that he's actually going to help things when he purchases Twitter, I'm immediately hit with, and this is like seriously, immediately hit with, Oh, what? Do you like it now? You think Twitter's great now? You think it's better now? Like, why do people do this? I'm like, I sincerely don't understand. My objection to Elon Musk owning Twitter is tantamount to my support for the current situation. I don't understand why people jump to project an opinion they dislike upon you in this sort of like, you know, within this false dichotomy framing that the media likes to engage in, right? So just to be exceptionally clear about my personal position, I don't think Elon Musk buying Twitter is a good thing at all. I think it's actually quite a terrifying sign. That does not mean I want the Saudi crown prince owning Twitter or whatever other billionaires are currently invested in Twitter. That does not mean I think Twitter's policies have been good. It means I don't think Elon buying Twitter is good. So I really want to encourage everybody to break themselves of these fucking false dichotomies, you guys. If you criticize NATO's role in creating the Ukraine situation, you get called a Putin lover, right? It's just like Iraq. Like, you remember, if you oppose the war in Iraq, you must love Saddam. Like, it's insane. It's incoherent. And yet this is how we engage on all of these issues. So just to make my position clear, I think Elon is a terribly concerning character. I don't like him having control or ownership over any important institution in our society. I don't like the power that he has from his wealth alone. I think that needs to be cut into. Like, I don't think that any movement in the direction of billionaires owning and controlling public speech institutions, I don't think that's good. I also don't like the current setup for Twitter, and I don't think that's good. So, like, just to make my position kind of clear on this and encourage everybody not to assume another person's position based upon their criticism of one side or the other. It's no different, you guys. We all remember this in 2016 and in 2020. If you dared to criticize the Democrats, what did the partisan Democrats say to you? Oh, you Trump lover? You supporting Trump? Okay, it is all like petulant, toddler level political analysis, okay? And I have a thread here that goes into some of the reasons why I think you should be concerned about Elon Musk purchasing Twitter. This is by Joshua Potash. Great follow on Twitter if you're interested in following him. Elon Musk keeps tweeting that he loves free speech. So here's a thread with just a few of the countless examples showing he couldn't care about it less. There's the time he called Vernon Unsworth, the man who helped rescue 12 boys trapped in a mine in Thailand, a pedo guy, and paid $50,000 to an investigator to dig up Unsworth's life. Why? Because Unsworth called his failed attempt to help the boys himself a PR stunt, which is exactly what it was, by the way. Elon loves to do this. He takes some sort of catastrophe and claims, oh, I'll pay to fix it, and then never does. He did this with the homelessness. He did this with the, famine around the world. I mean, on and on. Number 2. Then there's the story of John Bernal, who was fired 6 days after posting a YouTube video of a Tesla accident. Elon fires employees who speak out about dangerous products. Wonderful. Then there's Martin Tripp, a technician at a Tesla plant in Nevada who blew the whistle on the company. Musk allegedly hired people to hack and spy on Tripp after he cast doubts on Tesla's environmental credentials. So another claim that Elon makes is, no, I'm one of the good guys. I'm trying to move us towards a more sustainable energy grid. Lots of claims that Tesla is not moving as far towards that end as they like to claim that they are. This is another example of Musk trying to dox and silence somebody who comes out and acknowledges that. Very pro-free speech when you are coming down on and silencing whistleblowers, right? Really pro-free speech kind of stuff right there. Number 4, Musk also is anti-free speech when it comes to labor organizing. Tesla worker Richard Ortiz was fired for trying to organize with the United Auto Workers, a move that was declared illegal by a labor board. I'm pro-free speech unless you're pro-worker. Then you can sit down and shut up and be silenced. Then there's the time Tesla asked China to censor comments that were critical of the company. So literally outright asking a powerful government to censor something critical of him. You're so pro-free speech, bro. 6, there's also the time that Musk tried to put out an anonymous Tesla critic, an anonymous Tesla critic and skeptical investor who goes by Montana Skeptic to their employer. So he tried to get someone literally canceled, tried to get someone fired because they were critical of his company, really pro-free speech. 7, he also has tried to use Twitter itself to suppress worker speech and organizing a move deemed illegal by the NLRB. So he's now using the company that he purchased to suppress free speech of workers, and people are still out here talking about Elon Musk is going to save free speech on Twitter. Are you fucking kidding me? These are just a few examples. We're sure to see many more. Soon as he takes over Twitter, his free speech bravado is just a mask to hide the ways he suppresses speech that go against his interest. More below. So, you know, do not fall for the Elon Musk is going to save free speech nonsense, you guys. And also do not buy into the false dichotomy surrounding the issue online. So if somebody expresses concern about Elon taking over, do not assume that they support the current situation at Twitter. And if somebody expresses that they have issues with the current situation at Twitter, that does not mean that they support Elon Musk. So I want to break through some of the way that these things seem to be framed, and I want to encourage my audience to be very wary of billionaires buying important institutions. That should just always be a red flag. It really doesn't much matter what they say their intention is, you guys. We should always oppose billionaires owning the most important and vital institutions in our society. And I think at this point, quite frankly, the major social media outlets or companies rather, platforms are starting to kind of, you know, sneak into that category of being among the most vital institutions to our society, because they host so much communication and so much information sharing, and their algorithms can so dictate public thought and public discourse and narratives. And a lot of what politics amounts to is simply fighting rhetorical battles like that. So if you have this tool that can sway things in one direction or another, it's not good to have that tool in the hands of somebody who, because of their wealth alone, often stands to benefit from one side or another of these arguments. So you think when we're talking about taxing the rich, you think Elon is going to not use his new tool to influence in a direction that he approves of? You think when some story comes out about Tesla union busting or something dangerous about a Tesla product, or the recent recall, right? They just had to recall tens of thousands of cars because apparently they're actually really shitty at making cars. This is like apparently a well-known thing. So he's not even, he's a 100 billionaire for shitty cars and for combating the climate crisis in ways that are actually just kind of deceitful, according to the whistleblower that he tried to silence while he says that he's taking over Twitter to enhance free speech. I mean, you guys, please don't fall for this. Please don't fall for this. I also wanted to show you guys this. I'm sure some of you saw the ridiculous meme that he shared. My commentary is Elon's political analysis is toddler level. It's also completely wrong. The Overton window has moved steadily to the right for some half a century. This is embarrassing. For those who didn't see what Elon shared, he also he stole this meme without giving credit, by the way. Someone else put this together and Elon shared it without giving credit. But you can see there, he is saying that he started center left in 2008 and that his fellow liberal was pretty close to him. And then apparently in 2012, the left sprinted to the left. That just didn't, like, guys, that just didn't, like, what event is he referring to? That didn't happen. And there's still Elon sitting, you know, a little closer to the center. And then he says by 2021, you have the woke progressive yelling bigot at Elon as he moves over to the right wing. I mean, seriously, you guys. So first of all, I mean, I don't even know. I honestly don't even know where to start on this. So, like I said, it's factually inaccurate. The Overton window has objectively moved to the right for about half a century. And that's been backed up by studies, by the way. Congress has moved to the right, not the left, over the last 40 or 50 years. The Democrats are basically the same as they were in 2012. He used 2008 and 2012 as his sort of lines of demarcation as he moved through this supposed shift to the left. Guys, in 2008, Barack Obama was the president. Who was his vice president? Was it Joe Biden, who's currently president? In 2012, who was vice president? Right? Elon, by the way, he followed up and said, I proudly voted for Barack Obama, but now the party has moved too far to the left. Who's president, Elon? You think Joe Biden was like left of Barack Obama? Joe Biden was specifically selected as vice president because of how right-wing he is. Elon's like, oh, the party's moved so far to the left. Elon, who was Speaker of the House in 2012? Who's Speaker of the House right now? Has the Democrats moved way to the left? Same speaker. It's Nancy Pelosi, right? So the leadership in the Democratic Party is the same. Richie Neal, Steny Hoyer, right? These are the high-ranking Dems. In the Senate, you could argue that what's his face from Nevada, Harry Reid, retired. So Chuck Schumer took over as leader in the Senate among the Senate Democrats. Is Chuck Schumer some sort of like firebrand lefty? No, he's a center-right neoliberal partisan Dem through and through. What the fuck are you talking about, Elon? What are you talking about? Look at the Senate leadership, right? My shitty senator out here in Washington State, Patty Murray. She's either number 2 or number 3. I think she's number 3 behind Dick Durbin and Chuck, if I have that right. Dick Durbin, is he new? He wasn't around in 2012? Patty Murray's been in the Senate for 20 plus years. Where have the Democratic Party moved to the left here, Elon? They haven't. They've moved steadily to the right, okay? And this gets to the main point. People make the mistake of viewing the political spectrum as though it is, first of all, as though you can do a two-dimensional political spectrum. You can't. Not any sort of coherent or rational one anyway. But the other thing that people tend to do is they think of culture issues as defining your political ideology. And that could not be further from the truth. Left, right ultimately should come down to what are your views on who should control the means of production. The core of your political ideology is who should control the means of production. You are on the right if you say the capitalists and the managerial class and the business owners. And you are on the left if you say that the workers should have at least significantly more control than they currently do over the means of production. So in what respect have we moved to the left since 2008 or 2012 in those regards, Elon? But what he's doing is he's falling for the superficial, petulant, simplistic, childish rhetoric that like what you think about Mr. Potato Head or the genderless potato head or the M&M not being as sexy or whatever, what you think of Dr. Seuss, you know, the people think that defines your politics. And that's what Elon is doing here. That's what Elon is doing here. So again, it's a thoroughly petulant way to look at political. It's a thoroughly petulant political analysis, and it's just flat out factually backwards and incorrect. So I just felt the need to point that out and sort of give you an idea of how unserious Elon's analysis of free speech issues to start with are, let alone his supposed intention or capacity to impact free speech in a positive direction. It's just not going to happen, you guys. Do not fall for this. Billionaires are going to come save us by buying up institutions that are important. Do not fall for it. So obviously ridiculous. Okay. And his meme here sort of showing how unserious his analysis is from the jump. I also just wanted to briefly touch on, you guys, this just doesn't really fall into any sort of story, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit. The Obamas are no longer going to be doing their podcast. They were basically not offered a re-up from Spotify. And what's so funny about this to me, you guys, like, honestly, what the Obamas wanted is they wanted a like multi-million-dollar deal where they only did 8 episodes a year. They wanted a multi-million-dollar deal to do 8 episodes a year. And they said the rest of the time that they would be propping up other voices that they think should be more prominent. This just, it speaks to the entitlement, you guys. It speaks to how highly Obama thinks of himself. That he thinks that's what he is worth. And by the way, nobody, like, it's they still have this weird goodwill in the Democratic Party. They're still treated as elites in the Democratic Party and some of the core decision makers in the Democratic Party. You can just look at what happened in the primary in 2020 to see how much influence the Obamas still have over the Democratic Party. But outside of it, like, who wants to listen to them talk on a podcast, you guys? This is a common misunderstanding that I think might be somewhat generational. It's the same mistake CNN made trying to get into the CNN Plus, like doing the streaming thing. The misunderstanding about what actually drives viewership is really quite astonishing. And you know, that the Obamas could not recognize that their showing up 8 times a year is not going to drive enough viewership to justify multi-millions of dollars going to them. I mean, I'm sure it stings for them, but I think it kind of speaks to the current media environment and the lack of understanding on behalf of the establishment of why people do not want to listen to them anymore and are not so easily convinced by their the rhetoric that they spew on networks that they have monopolized anymore. So anyway, that just didn't fit in anywhere, but I wanted to make sure to mention it because I saw that story just a few days ago and it sort of interests me from a media perspective. Want to show you guys fantastic interview that I did with Len Harris. Regular viewers will recognize Len from a little while ago. She is a barista at Starbucks in Colorado, and Len's store just succeeded only maybe a week and a half here or so ago in their unionization efforts. So last week, Len sat down for an interview to discuss the process and how it went, how her colleagues have responded, etc. So this is Len Harris talking about their unionization success at Starbucks in Colorado. So I am very happy to have back on the show Len Harris. Len had been on maybe a month or two ago talking about their efforts to unionize their store at Starbucks, and they have succeeded. So a humongous congratulations to Len, and thank you for taking the time to come back on.
Thank you so much for having me. Honestly, I wouldn't have been able to do it without my coworkers. So it wasn't just an effort from me.
Yeah. I couldn't be more thrilled for you guys. I see this wave happening all over the place. I saw one in Virginia yesterday also voted to unionize, and it just keeps on rolling. Can you just talk a little bit about what was the process like? How did your coworkers react to the results?
Yeah, so the process of counting, so obviously like I mentioned in the last time that you had me on, the whole gathering people's votes, or signing the petition, making sure a majority sign said petition so that the actual union election could be underway. For a long time, Starbucks pushed against that. So our election date was pushed out for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. We filed to unionize on the 30th of December, which was coincidentally the same as the Marshall fires. And then we didn't get our union election vote scheduled until the 22nd. This was this past Friday. So it was quite a haul of time before we finally got it. But yeah, ultimately it was just we got our ballots in on like the 4th or 5th of April. They were mailed out at that time. We filled out our ballots, sent it back in. And once they confirmed they had valid ballots, they counted and we won by 12-2.
That is just fantastic, and a big margin there as well, like all these other stores, or most of these other stores. And how did what was the response from the company and from your coworkers? How did everyone feel about how things went?
So my coworkers were thrilled. There was the moment that we hit the magic number, because obviously you don't need like all of the votes to be yes, you just need a majority vote. And our majority vote number was 8. So once we counted 8 yes ballots, we knew we'd won. And so there was a big eruption, we all start laughing and hugging each other. So there was a lot of excitement. I know that some management was upset. There was some tears on that side. And I never want to hurt people's feelings, but ultimately, I don't think if you knew what was happening, you'd cry about it. So maybe that's a little cruel of me, but I've done everything to be as educated on my end and educate others as well. So, but the company is it's putting on this pretense of diplomacy, and I think they'll follow some of it. But ultimately, I know there's going to be a lot of pushback coming.
Have they rhetorically said that they will negotiate in good faith? I mean, what is their overt position?
So they've said that they're going to negotiate in good faith. They've said we will recognize what the partners want and we'll make sure to go from there. They've taken the position of being a diplomatic corporate lead on this. But seeing as multiple stores have reported union busting tactics, the NLRB has already filed multiple suits against Starbucks for union busting. I mean, the amount of time that people have had to wait for their union elections, that's a form of union busting. So it's kind of like, it almost feels like tongue in cheek. I want to believe that they're going to argue in good faith. But seeing as, the first store that won their union election, Buffalo, on the 9th of December last year, and they haven't ratified a contract, they've bargained make twice, but they still don't have a contract ratified yet. It's very clear that they're going to drag their feet. So they might go along with it, but they're going to make it a grueling process, which certainly causes people to peter off, to leave,
Yeah. Yeah, I saw a More Perfect Union clip that was going over. They couldn't even list all the places that had filed with the NLRB. I mean, they were trying to go around the country, and they basically said from Buffalo to Seattle and everywhere in between, you've had illegal, union busting and files made with the NLRB. So what kind of things do you and your coworkers see in this that will like what's going to improve? Can you just talk to people who might not actually understand what the benefit of a union is? What about your lives and your work lives are going to improve here with this union?
So first of all, we have legal representation for our work. So instead of just, having to go to your boss and say like, hey, so I think I deserve a raise, and them saying, maybe you do, maybe you don't. You literally have legal representation to be like, okay, well, I have someone to fight for me to do this. There's also, there's this fear that people have, and I mean, you've seen it across the country where people are being fired indiscriminately for justifiable claims from the company, but the NLRB has already issued multiple suits against Starbucks to say, nope, you did not fire this person lawfully. It's for union busting. So that's a big part of it too. So, this fear of being let go for some small thing, that is no longer, that's something that we want to implement, is due cause firing. They argue that, oh, well, bad workers will be able to stay on. That may be a small percentage, but currently we already have people in the company that probably would be better off elsewhere, and yet the management isn't doing anything about it. Frankly, at my store, they're browbeating the best workers so that they're leaving, and the ones that maybe aren't as adequate aren't getting any sort of talking to. So another thing that we want to focus on, of course, is wage increases. By and large, the majority of people in unions across the country are paid a lot more than their non-union partners. So wage increase is a big thing. Of course, we want to see expansions to some benefits like mental health days. You talk about sick days. There's plenty of, I think if people were being honest with themselves, there are days when you wake up and you may be physically like, you don't feel nauseated, you don't feel like you have a cold or a fever, but you're like, I emotionally cannot fathom going to work right now. I'm beside myself, I'm besotted kind of thing. Your mind is most of your body. A lot of people, mental health isn't taken nearly as seriously as it should be. So mental health days, we want to see compensation for short staffing. So if 6 people are supposed to work and 4 people show up, currently those 2 people's wages get reabsorbed into the company. We want to see those go back to the workers who now have to work for 6 people and there's only 4 of them. We want to see tip increases. The way that we're tipped is really bottlenecked and really there's a chokehold on our tipping. So we want to see that improved. We'd like to see, a rise in our wages similar, if not equal to the consumer price index every year. So there's a lot of things that we are arguing for that will ultimately give us better staffing, better wages, better benefits, and just a better overall working condition.
The hours one really stands out to me because that's been a huge tactic of Starbucks, and I think we talked about this last time as well, that they will take workers who might be involved with or supportive of the union and cut their hours down. And another way that this tactic works is what you were just talking about. If you're suddenly leaving everybody short-staffed for most of their shifts, that's frustrating, and people might no longer want to work there, right? So that is a really, really huge one, and that's a tactic that Starbucks has used. So I hope that that can be sort of cut into there. I want to get your thoughts on, last time it was Kevin Johnson that we were talking about. They decided to get rid of Kevin Johnson because he was not successful enough union busting. That little bit is my opinion, but it seems pretty obvious that's exactly why he was given the boot. And they bring back Howard Schultz, who is a known union buster, notorious union buster. I was just curious, what are your thoughts on him calling you his so-called workers? I don't know if you saw that quote, but that's what he thinks of you all the partners, is that you are so-called workers. I'm curious if you could respond to that.
Yeah. I've always tried to take a diplomatic approach because I want to believe in genuine diplomacy. So it's not like I think he's some evil plotting little villain in his office, like this is gonna get him. Maybe he is, I'm not gonna perpetuate that idea. It's insulting. I frankly think his perspective is short-sighted, it's narrow, it's older. I don't having an older perspective isn't inherently bad, but having a vicious affront to new perspective is bad. I think there's a manner of purposeful or not purposeful. I would hope it's not purposeful. I have the inclination that it is. Disconnect between the reality that if he leaves, anybody could come in and just be like, okay, we're going to change this, this, and this. Like all these worker benefits that were instated to stop people from unionizing, they're not profitable. He canceled the stock buyback program to reinvest into workers. That's great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but who's to say the next person won't come in and be like, okay, let's reinstate this. I mean, you see it everywhere. People will perform, they'll do, virtue signaling and performative activism. I know Toyota just did this where they stopped donating or stopped receiving donations from controversial figures about the January 6th insurrection and or the attempted coup, and now they're accepting those donations again. So I would just want to say to him, there is nothing monumentally crazy about wanting to have my work legally protected no matter who is in charge. It is nothing against him. It is about protecting me and my coworkers. And if he's the visionary that so many people think of him to be, of a progressive company, he wouldn't be opposed to this, is my opinion on it. So.
Well, I think what's so ironic there, it's a great point, because I think it's like a lot of these guys who are executives at these companies that are doing the union busting, it's like, I guarantee you, if you put them as a barista in a store, they'd be the first ones to bitch and moan about the work conditions and the compensation, and they'd be the first ones to be like, oh my God, we need to unionize. This is awful.
Facts.
So it's so ironic. Like they get to go and negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts and multi-million-dollar golden parachutes to go from this company to that company, and they're sitting here, cracking down on people who are making barely minimum wage in a lot of cases to do the work that actually keeps the company afloat. Another portion of his messaging that I thought was very interesting is he keeps using this term. He did a meeting with managers, and some of this was leaked, and he keeps using this term outside force to describe the union. There's this outside force that wants to take over our company and take our workers, and and it just seems to me like, no, this is as inside a source as you can possibly get. This is like your company is making these moves. So can you talk a little bit about that mentality that he has towards his employees?
I think he kind of, it's not just him, it's many people, but I think the perception of unionizing comes from I kind of compare it to you smelt it, you dealt it. It's like, just because you're trying to impose as a force unto its workers an ideal that isn't working for us. We've already come back to say these working conditions aren't workable. We need change. And you're coming in saying, no, like, obviously you're one company, so they don't think of it that way. Unions have always helped other unions become established, but who is embodying the Starbucks union are Starbucks workers. They're literally us. I mean, I'm the lead of this organization. Of course, I didn't do this by myself. This was made possible by my coworkers. But I've been with the company since 2016. Are you saying that I'm not am I an outside force? I don't understand. So it's just kind of like, I almost want to play stupid, but it's like, just because you're accusing a group of trying to manipulate us into conditions that aren't favorable for us, like that's what you think. Like, it's funny that you're accusing the unions of doing that when not only is it not true, it's like, would you not say that's kind of what you're doing, especially with the union busting? Like, so anyway, it's ironic. It's funny. If it would be more funny if it wasn't so sad. It just goes to show that they have a very meek and narrow and uninformed perspective about what's actually happening. And like I said, I hope it's not purposeful, but I feel like it is.
Yeah, it's how can you be doing captive audience meetings while you're also accusing the workers of being some sort of outside messaging force? It's like, who's doing those meetings? Isn't it a bunch of PR people that you just hired from the outside to come in and bust the union? I mean, it's really kind of, you can't make it up. Yeah. So I wanted to ask for viewers at home who might either be in a workplace that is not unionized but maybe should be unionized, or for workers at home who want to support somehow in their community, what would your advice be for people who want to get engaged in the labor movement and want to help keep this snowball rolling?
Honestly, education is going to be your biggest friend here. I mean, education in general is just good, and regardless, like trying to get an unbiased source to inform you is going to be a really powerful position. Because of course, when I first started, I grew up in a Republican, conservative, Catholic family. I'm not affiliated with really that sort of like those bullet points really much anymore. Obviously, I still love my family, but so my perspective was very not what it is now. And it takes a lot of discomfort to kind of take yourself out of your comfort zone and say, okay, what's everyone saying about this? What are the pros and cons of a union? So if you can really extricate yourself from your comfort zone, and frankly, that's just the best way to educate yourself anyway. Once you kind of let your ego die down, learning a bunch of things and perceiving them is much easier. So just take that time to educate yourself. And then honestly, just same situation. If you don't know what next steps you should take, look it up, ask people. Like, hey, I know that Starbucks Workers United is a huge unionizing movement right now with Starbucks workers. Send them a message. Say like, hey, how do I do this? What do I like? Send me a message. Send a bunch of people. Like, you eventually will get through to people. And it's all community based. If you're wondering, how do I support these people? If you support them, be vocal about it. Like at Starbucks, coworkers, or rather customers, I should say, will come in and say like, hey, I support you and your unionizing efforts. What should I do? I'm like, don't whisper. You don't have to. You can be loud and proud about it. But that's the interesting thing about society is they don't want us to be. It's so much easier to control and mitigate where people go and what they think when they're uneducated and when they're convinced that they are stronger, not as a collective, but as an individual. Meritocracy, individualism, it's been pushed through and through and through, and it's never the case. No one has ever made it on their own, ever.
That's
not the richest man you know never made it on their own. Yeah,
100%. Jeff Bezos did not produce billions and billions of dollars. His workers did. It's very, very simple. He took the excess value from their work, and yeah, absolutely the case. So and it's funny you mentioned that the whispering thing, because I've on occasion I've gone into Starbucks since this whole thing has been going on, and I'll just say something like, the community supports you guys if you want to unionize, and leave it at that. Just vocalize my support, whatever. And I've gotten
That's
very
great.
different range of responses, right? Some people are like very like, oh, that's so sweet, thank you, and you can tell it's actually like it's helpful. And then with some people, they look around like I just said Lord Voldemort or something, like, where's the manager? I got to make sure, so it is kind of funny to see. But I think vocalizing that support even from customers is good. And if you're in a workplace, like Len said, look into those who have had success here and figure out how you can get the ball rolling on organizing yourself. How do you see this movement impacting? You know, I'm not sure what things are like in Colorado, but it seems like this is across industries and kind of hitting across regions. And how do you see all of this success impacting the labor movement more broadly?
Ultimately, we've already been seeing this kind of immense exponential growth of people starting to unionize and organize and just get involved with activism. And I think, it's kind of a long time coming. I want to say maybe that's a little optimistic to say, but actual activism as opposed to just like tweeting something and we're starting to see that because we're starting to see, oh, I don't have to have all my shit together, so to speak, in order to make change. So I can only see it making a further positive impact with the labor movement. I mean, we already have, I think it's 5 or 6 Colorado Starbucks elections coming up here in the next couple weeks. So I was the first one, but there are many more to follow. I was keeping up with how many stores have filed. You think of Buffalo when they won their union election on the 9th of December last year. At that time, only a handful of stores had filed. Like my store, when we filed on the 30th of December, we were store number 11. It might be 12, but I'm pretty sure. And that's like across the country. We were store number 11 across the country. And now, April 25th, is today the 25th? It is the 25th.
Yes.
April 25th, there's over 250 stores that have filed. So that's a huge growth in the last just like 4 months. So I can only see it as a domino effect. That's been something that's been trending on Twitter is dominoes, make them fall like dominoes. So that's what I can see it as. That's how I see it. It's going to be a domino effect.
Well, and in this case, like I think even if what's amazing to me is how few losses I've seen. I mean, I think I've only seen a few losses, and almost all of them have been wins. And in this particular, like it's the case that it would be a loss for Starbucks even if they were winning the vast majority of these votes, right? Like even one can get the ball rolling. So I think the fact that it has been so successful and so overwhelmingly, I'm seeing not just yes votes, but it's like it's often numbers like you described, 1 or 2 no votes, and that's it, and it's not even close. I think that sort of speaks to the mood of the country right now, and we haven't seen a labor movement in, I mean, basically half a century. We haven't seen any real push for labor. So I'm very encouraged by this. I think it gives me a lot of hope, right? As we go into the Amazon thing, the Warrior Met coal strike, the animators, all the Google workers, it just goes on and on and on. Isn't it crazy? Like it's really encouraging to see. Yeah. So I really appreciate you taking the time, Len, and I hope we can catch up again soon about this. And I just want to give you a humongous congratulations and pass that on to your colleagues, please.
Absolutely.
And just on a closing note, if you can just kind of reiterate to the audience, what can they do in their communities to be supportive here? You said voice your support. What kind of like actions were you guys engaged in that the community could have been involved in?
Honestly, pay attention to what stores might be walking out or doing strikes. Having that kind of, those kinds of bodies picketing is always great. That's not always going to happen, however. So honestly, just encouraging people to be communicative. At Starbucks, like I'd said before, we had people ordering coffee saying Union Strong or anything of that caliber, just making it known that they're not alone. They're not fighting alone. And the stronger the community, the easier it's going to be to feel like your voice matters, which is funny. They try to say like, oh, your voice is going to be buried in the sea of voice. It's like, no. That's not how that works. Like once you're stronger together, you're always stronger together. So honestly, just take the time to pay attention. Search on Facebook, some Facebook groups. Like I have one Facebook group I belong to that's the city that I belong to. So everybody in the city or people who live in the city belong to this Facebook group. So I post on that Facebook group, hey, we just unionized, come support us. And most of the responses are like, oh my God, congratulations. I'm going to come right now kind of thing. So just honestly, it's just taking the time to do a little searching. Like, let's look around, see what people are doing, support whatever they're doing, assume good intent as well too. I think just having a general love and respect for your community, it's going to be a lot easier to see where people need that support and how to do it.
Yeah, and I really do think it's important to vocalize that support, because I think that in many cases, and I think this is one of them, I think the majority of our society supports workers and labor efforts and unions. And yet, if everybody's quiet about it, how is a worker supposed to know that when they're going up against this, Goliath of a corporation that they're trying to stand up against, So, and in fact, Kim Kelly has been covering the Warrior Met Coal thing quite a bit, and she said you'd be surprised how much it means just to bring these guys a cup of coffee while they're on the line striking. You know what I mean? Like, just stuff like that. Like, here, the community supports you. We really do. That kind of thing really does mean the world to workers who are trying to, it's terrifying to stand up against a corporation like Starbucks or Warrior Met Coal or what have you. So thank you so much for taking the time, Len. We really appreciate it. And I'm thrilled. A huge congratulations again. I hope we can talk again soon.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it was a pleasure. I would look forward to talking again soon, and just keep up that solidarity. That's what's going to make the difference.
Absolutely. Wonderful interview there with Len. Huge congratulations to her and her colleagues and all of the Starbucks baristas and others around the country who are finding success in this labor movement. And I saw a couple of super chats there, but I seem to have lost them, so I apologize. I can't shout you up by name, but thank you so much for the super chats. realprogressives.org/donate. If you'd like to become a monthly patron or give us a one-time donation, you can also leave a super chat or a super sticker in the live chat there. We are a nonprofit and very much appreciate any support. And I also want to shout out Mark, who's been wonderful in the comments today. I got a chance to take a little peek there during the interview, and your latest comment there about what Kevin Johnson might be up to right now, that should be the title of an Onion piece. So I just wanted to shout out Mark. He's been keeping us entertained there in the live chat. We're going to transition here into the labor update. Feels like kind of a natural way to do this, talking with Len there about the organizing efforts at her Starbucks store. We're going to go right into a More Perfect Union clip that is actually about Starbucks, the latest that they have on their reporting of these efforts across the country. We also have some stuff to talk about with Amazon union busting, and we also have some reporting on minor league baseball players and how they are exploited by the big leagues. So we're going to start with Starbucks here. This is More Perfect Union at More Perfect US on Twitter. Make sure to go give them a follow. They do excellent reporting.
If I walk into a Starbucks and I'm looking for a job, what do I get paid? Anyone know roughly? How much?
About 15 now for me.
You got 15?
13.
13. $12 an hour. Do you know that those are horrendously low wages? Dumb question, but you know. Can you afford the health care that they give you? No. All right, so understand, I want you to understand this. Because this is the bullshit that corporations often do. What they say to the public, McDonald's does it as well, Walmart does it. They say, we're really generous. We are offering health care, we have this, we have that. And you look at the figures, nobody takes it because they can't afford it. You understand that is a bad situation. Anybody can walk across the street, get hit by a bus. You have friends who have been diagnosed with serious illnesses, right? It can happen to anybody.
I rejoined Starbucks in July last year whenever I moved to Richmond, and then in late August I was diagnosed with cancer. And so I had no choice but to work full-time hours at Starbucks to afford health insurance so that I could get chemotherapy and all my medications. So I'm working at least 30 hours a week. I'm chemo sick.
What is your name?
My name is TJ.
TJ? All right. Thank you.
Thank God I had my last treatment in January.
I wanted to know how much knowledge you have about the hours you're working in the next couple of weeks.
It's never certain. You can tell your manager how many hours you want to work, and they might give it to you, but it's really up to them what they get.
All right, so you may end up working 35 hours and not 40.
I could get scheduled 28 hours tomorrow.
Is that sometimes? Is that
yes, sir. But now that we've started union efforts, our store has actually hired a lot more employees very suddenly. We're now overstaffed and our hours are being cut.
So what I'm hearing from you is you may end up in a given month with less income than you thought you would have.
Yes, sir.
So it's hard to budget if you don't know how much money you're making. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. You know, up until very recently, a supervisor or barista who's been there 5 years, 10 years, 15 is making the same amount as one that's just starting.
All right, let me see how smart you guys are. Why do they do that? You would think if you work 5 years, she worked 1 year, rather significantly more, right? She has more experience.
Absolutely.
Why do they keep your salary low?
Do they want us to leave?
Yeah. In other words, look, there are two different business models. One business model, the humane business model. So look, I want you to work for the company the whole life. Good wages, benefits, everything. And you're going to move up the ladder. Okay? Because I want you to sit. There's another business model, which is McDonald's, which is Walmart, which I learned today is Amazon. The truth is, I really don't want you to stay. Because as soon as you're gone, I don't have to pay any benefits, then the next guy comes in. That is their strategy. When you bring in more people, you keep wages low, and you keep it churning around. Understand that what you are doing impacts not just your job in Starbucks, it is impacting the entire country. Real power rests with very, very wealthy people who own the economy, who own our political system. And the thing that these guys on top are most afraid of, but they are afraid that you guys will say, wait a minute, let's see, 31% increase in profits, $60 million to the former CEO, Schultz gets $1 billion richer, and I'm making 12 bucks. That doesn't make sense. That's not right. So what I want you to appreciate, your instincts here are right instincts. Now the system is not going to tell you that. And you are striking a nerve because you are acting in the way that millions and millions of people feel.
Wonderful reporting there. I like Bernie's last point that the system's not going to tell you that your instincts are right here, but your instincts are right here. Obviously, the company is not going to do things in your best interest, right? So, and that story from TJ, you guys, like that brought a tear to my eye. That's absolutely terrible. And yet I'm sure it's not a terribly uncommon story. Is that the society we want to build? Do we want to build a society where cancer patients have to increase their work hours so that they can afford health care? I mean, is that showing up to work, chemo sick? That's the society that we're going to fucking build? Also what? So Howard Schultz can make a few extra bucks? What an incredible story. And I just want to take a moment to note, like, this is part of why I think More Perfect Union's work is so important, because I think a lot of us know that things like that are happening on a regular basis. And yet it really sincerely does hit differently to hear somebody explain what they have been through. Then, like, you at home, just like ask yourself right now, you at home, if I would have just regurgitated the facts of TJ's story to you, that would have hit you not as strongly as hearing TJ explain what happened, right? So what More Perfect Union is doing is not just putting the facts out there, they're letting people hear, how is this impacting people's lives? And I think when we hear it in that framing, from that sort of point of view, it hits us differently. I think there are a lot of people listening right now, a lot of people around the country. Not that there are a lot of people listening to my live streams. I'm not, naive. But I think there are a lot of people around the country who know that stuff like that happens on an intellectual level, in like an abstract way. They know that kind of stuff is happening. If you told them that story vaguely, they'd be like, yeah, I'm sure that happens all the time. But it hits you differently when you got to hear the human being explain how that impacts their lives, right? So I just wanted to shout out More Perfect Union, bringing you these stories from the people themselves and humanizing the issue, because I think that's incredibly important. I stand in full solidarity, of course, with Starbucks. You guys, I'm sorry, with Starbucks employees, not with Starbucks. And I think that they're bringing Howard Schultz back to continue his career-long union-busting campaign is outrageous and morally repugnant. So good on those workers. You guys, as I'll always encourage you, don't cross those picket lines. Support striking workers in your area. I saw someone in the live chat there asking about, can I find Starbucks that are unionized so that I can know which ones to go to. I don't have that information on hand. I wish I do, but I'm quite sure you can. I know More Perfect Union on their website does have a map of all Starbucks that have filed for and have succeeded in unionization. So you might go to moreperfect.us and look at their maps of which Starbucks have unionized, which ones have not, which ones have filed, so that you know where to direct your efforts and where you know, if you want to make as ethical of a consumer decision as you can under capitalism, then you can go maybe check out their website and go to a Starbucks that actually has unionized if you're so inclined. So stand with workers if they're organizing in your area, you guys, whether that's striking or walking out or unionizing or picketing or whatever it might be. Make sure that you're standing in solidarity with the working class everywhere. I want to show you guys a clip here. This is also More Perfect Union. It's about minor league baseball players. This is something I've actually talked about a few different times, and I grant you part of it is because I'm a total sports nerd, and I absolutely love baseball. I'm a huge Seattle Mariners fan, so I accept all of your condolences in advance for the last 2 decades of my baseball life, but we actually are good this year, I think, so we'll see. I might be getting my hopes up a little prematurely. But anyway, the point is, this story kind of hits home for me because I often follow, sports stories and baseball stories. And seeing how minor leaguers are treated when they're not called up to the major leagues is really something. They're exploited by the big leagues. And, I mention it every time that I bring up a sports story. I know that the very top are like extraordinarily overpaid. I really do take issue just as much as anyone at home might with someone making $30 million a year because they're talented to sport. I think that's outrageous. Don't get me wrong here. But I do want to point out that the alternative is the owners and the TV networks making that money. So I would prefer it at least be the athlete that's like somewhat sacrificing their body and that has the talent make that money. But that's a whole different discussion about, labor in sports. The point that matters to me is that it's worth noting that the bottom is always exploited. And this is not different in sports, right? The people working at the stadiums are not paid particularly well. The people who are pouring your beers and making your burgers and hot dogs and bringing you peanuts and Cracker Jacks and cotton candy, they are not paid very well, right? The security, the ushers, the people who take your tickets, all those folks, they're not paid particularly well either. The alcohol enforcement, none of that. They're not paid very well. So that it's all rooted in exploitation of the low-wage worker. In this case, those who are actually providing the entertainment are also in many cases undercompensated. Now, when you are in the minor leagues, they actually just signed a new collective bargaining agreement just this last offseason. We almost didn't have baseball this year, as some of you are probably well aware. In that collective bargaining agreement, they raised the minimum wage for major league players to, I believe it was either $700,000 or $725,000 a year. Okay. So when you're on the big league club, that's the wage that you're making for every day that you are called up to the big leagues. But teams it's a little bit complicated and I won't get into the weeds on it. Players have 3 options, 3 years where they can be optioned to the minor leagues, right? Without having to go through waivers where another team can pick you up. Again, I won't get into the weeds. The point is, players can, a number of times throughout their career, be sent down to the minor leagues by their major league team. When they're in the minor leagues, they're not making that minimum wage. They're making very low wages and they're living a pretty low quality life. Okay. So this is More Perfect Union covering how those workers were treated coming out of this new collective bargaining agreement and dealing with the shortened spring training. They'll get into some of these details, but I just want to point out, you guys, even in industries where we think of people as being overcompensated, and I grant you the top athletes are grossly overcompensated, okay? Especially compared to like freaking paramedics and firemen and teachers and grossly overcompensated. I totally agree. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that even in those industries, there are people at the bottom who are being exploited for the gain of the wealthiest involved. So this is More Perfect Union talking about how minor league baseball players are exploited.
Baseball season from May to late September, I made $9,800.
Off season, you're on your own. Part-time seasonal intern. Anybody that becomes a minor league baseball player signs the uniform player contract, and they're all 7 years. They decide where you go, they decide what level you're at to start a given year, and they have pretty much full control. The pay is non-negotiable. Everybody thinks about it as you get paid per month and you get 6 months if you're in a full season team. You're making anywhere from $6,000 for a season to $15,000 for a season if you're in AAA. league camp report is usually first week of March.
You are there all day, every day. You don't have opportunities to go do anything else to make money.
It's pretty much full work day for 2 months where you're not getting paid.
I think spring training is more difficult than the season. You know, strenuous on your body, and just the workload is more. I believe, you know, minor leaguers are more entitled to get paid during spring training than even in the regular season, just because of the workload, to be honest. I think a lot of people overlook that minor league baseball players aren't students. We're not in school. We have adult expenses, whether that be rent, you know, car, insurance, you know, whatever else. A lot of players, myself included, have children. I have a 3-year-old daughter, so $9,000 a year. It's kind of tough to support yourself. You have professional athletes, you know, the top 1% of baseball players in the world that are driving Uber and delivering food and, you know, working at Walmart, you know, overnight, when the off season you're supposed to be training to better yourself for the next season.
I've been a strength conditioning coach in the off season. I've done lessons. I've gotten into woodworking and built chairs and sold them on Facebook.
I've given lessons. I coach, you know, youth teams back home, and I've delivered food like Uber Eats, DoorDash, Postmates, stuff like that, just to, you know, make a couple dollars here and there and get ready to go spend a month where I don't have any income at all. The problem with getting a job is a lot of places won't hire you because you're only home for, you know, 4 or 5 months out of the year, and you have to be straight up in the interview process that, hey, I'm not going to be here. So my housing last year, I was living in a townhome garage. So I was on the bottom level living in a garage. It was like 85 square feet, no heat, no air in it. Fast forward to this year, the Diamondbacks did an outstanding job. They put all of us up in apartments, furnished, Wi-Fi, you know, own bedrooms.
It's up to each team. They can make it better for their guys if they wanted to. And teams that are doing it should be commended, and the teams that are continuing not to do it with the writing on the wall, they should be called out.
I think this is the first time that minor leaguers have actually, you know, gotten together and started to create a voice for ourselves, and I think it's huge.
I would like to see guys make a livable salary, and I'd like to see guys make that throughout the year. I mean, I don't think it's too much to ask for the top 2% of professional baseball players to be able to be paid year-round.
The fact that players have to put the bat and glove down because they don't get paid enough is sick. Nobody thinks the minor leaguers are supposed to get paid millions of dollars in the minor leagues. That's why we're in the minor leagues. You know, we're here to develop and get better, and hopefully one day, you know, you're good enough to play in the big leagues, and that's where you get paid like that.
It's a big money industry. I mean, it's there. And so to have an ugly side of it where you have guys that can't, you know, see their wives all year because they can't afford to have them out, like, that just doesn't add up.
Just because the season is half the year doesn't mean that our job stops the other half. Getting compensated for us doing our job is what I think we want to see.
So wonderful reporting there. And we actually covered it. It was I'm so bad at tracking time, you guys, but months and months ago, I want to say last summer or something, More Perfect Union had covered that push for better housing, and you saw some of the results there from one of the Diamondbacks prospects. So these kinds of efforts do prevail, you guys. They really can make a difference. And I stand in full solidarity with these minor league players. It's really crazy to think, too, in this case, like they kept pointing out, you guys, AAA is the highest minor league level. AAA ball players could be in the major leagues and they wouldn't stand out. They're right there. They're in the top % or 2 of players in the world at this sport, and they're being paid $9 grand for a season. You know, so again, I'm not sitting here and trying to say that all of these guys should be making $40 million a year because they're good at a sport. Okay, I'm really not. I understand that that's ludicrous and ridiculous too. But to have those, they just showed at the end, 24 out of 30, is that what they said, are owned by billionaires or multi-billion dollar corporations. So the alternative is that those individuals and companies get to just scrape more unnecessary, undeserved, unwarranted profits off the labor of these people, right? So And it's also like it's an area where people, you guys, it's like a huge accomplishment to make it to AAA. Like, for Christ's sake, you have to be a really, really damn good baseball player to make it to AAA. Okay, so it sort of betrays the meritocracy talking points and narrative on our economy, right? That, oh, if you just work hard and you're just talented and good at something, if you have something to offer, you'll make it, you'll be fine. No, these guys get sent up and sent down. You know, they make good money for a week or two, and then they get sent right back down, making $9 grand a season. So, you know, the housing thing really does prove these efforts work, and I want to see labor organizers continued this push in all industries and across the country. So, you know, shout out to these ball players who are standing up for their own livelihood and their value and valuing themselves and, you know, sort of wielding the power that workers have everywhere. I'd like to see this across all sorts of industries and you know, it clearly is taking place as I would like. So great coverage from More Perfect Union. You know, sorry to put you guys through a sports story, which might just be a little bit more along my interests than some of the audience, but you know, fantastic coverage there, and I stand in full solidarity with those workers. And we have one more here to bring you guys from More Perfect Union. Again, this is about Amazon's latest union busting tactics. So I'm sure a number of you are aware the Staten Island warehouse succeeded in unionizing. We have the Bessemer election in the middle of a recount, and we also have a couple other warehouses that are right next to the one warehouse in Staten Island that succeeded in unionizing are also having their own union elections. So this is pertaining to those Staten Island warehouses, if memory serves. This is More Perfect Union talking about Amazon's latest union busting tactics.
Amazon employees, I have to ask you guys to leave the property.
Immediately. So if you're not an Amazon associate, pack up everything and please go.
Cool.
Please do not come back on site.
Okay.
You've been told. Thank you.
I've been told?
Yep.
Okay.
It's
going to take me about 10 minutes to get packed up.
Do not come back on site.
Yeah, so I mean, these two, I mean, you know, they come around like a couple times a day. They take down any posters we have up. They rip down the signage. They kick out the other organizers. They kick out UPS workers. Anyone who's coming to support the union. What's disgusting? Union busting. What's disgusting? Union busting. Can't wait.
Guys gonna win, you think?
Yes. I hope so. I think, I mean, according to like phone banking data we have, you know, it's looking good. But the thing is, like, they put the amount of resources that they put into JFK 8, they just swiveled it over to our building, and we are 1/7 of the size. So we're getting hit with just as many union busters, but like, you know, it's like a 1 to 15 person ratio. They just bred this climate of fear where it's like, people are genuinely afraid to talk to us in the building because they don't want to get fired.
Are they still doing a lot of big captive audience meetings?
Yeah, so usually they're like 20 people, but the past week what they've been doing is they've stopped production for the last hour of each shift to bring every single person, 500 people on the shift, into this meeting where the general manager and like the vice president of HR for all of Amazon comes and begs people basically to vote no. Like, never in the history of Amazon have they ever stopped production to pull people for an all hands on deck meeting.
I was working on lane 2, and they pulled like a number of, they're called splitters. They're the people who take the boxes off the conveyor belt and split them into different sections. They pulled probably like 5 of them off of the lane to go take them to a union busting meeting, and it caused a huge pile of boxes. There was another person who was trying to get boxes off the conveyor belt, and it had piled up all the way around his head so that he was trapped next to the conveyor belt, and I had to literally unbury him out of these boxes. And that's because they're pulling people into union busting meetings. So, I mean, they're literally creating safety hazards in order to try to get us to vote no.
The union busting has gotten worse ever since JFK 1.
I think the tactics show a level of desperation, and I think workers see that too, and I think it's backfiring. It happened in JFK 8 also. They started to get desperate, they started to get aggressive. They arrested Chris and Brett and Jason.
I've had the same 2 managers tailing me no matter what lane I'm in, no matter what section of the warehouse I'm in, for the past 2 days. I've tried to move to get out of their way. They come and find me. They go, oh, do you need some help here? It's like, no, I don't need help here. We have like 3 other workers that I'm working with right now. But they tail you. They know who the organizers are, so they're making a concerted effort to prevent us from talking to people, and and they're also trying to scare the workers so that they're not wearing the lanyards, they're not wearing the shirts, and we can't build momentum as easily.
They're also having the union busters, the outside consultants, disguised as workers. They gave them the blue badges, they hired them on as workers, and they have them on the floor pretending to be workers, talking with the actual workers, telling them to vote no. Meanwhile, these union busters are getting paid $400 an hour.
I would get hired tomorrow. What's the salary? 1825. Okay.
And just for perspective too, like we want a cost of living raise as well, because I mean, I come from Arizona, I'm only making $2 more, and it's 3 times the cost of living.
Right.
We get 25-cent raise every 6 months, and then after 3 years, we don't get a raise. We'd have to go to a higher position. When there ain't enough room to get a higher position, you move up, you should get more pay. If I take another job besides where I began at, if I start teaching people my job, I deserve a raise. Each job you take, you should get extra money for what you do.
They don't accept people's like shift change to become full-time workers. They've like denied me full-time work. There's a lot of favoritism in LDJ5. Like if you're not really like not friends with the managers, you get stuck in the worst lanes.
All the stories, all the horror stories you heard and from JFK 8, they're true in our building too. And they're true in every Amazon building across the country. So this movement right here, this is just the beginning, like everyone's been saying.
People are coming from all over the country to help support. You know, we've had people out on the line from many different unions, from Amazonians United, from workers at Amazon in different states, all of whom, you know, they're all organizing too, and we're all part of the same movement. We all want the same things. We all see how important it is that this succeed.
This union's got some serious union drip going on, and I am seriously inspired. Eat the rich, baby, that's right. He wore this in front of the major investors of Amazon.
Jeff Bezos, your time is coming, brother. Your time is coming, you hear me? The people have spoken, and it's time for us to whoop that ass in that election.
Well, we're going to try to take it nationwide after this. We're going to get our infrastructure together for the next few months, and then we're going to have a national call for hopefully every building in the country. And then once again, we'll see a domino effect like you see with the Starbucks movement. We want to do the same thing with Amazon.
We got to a point where the workers are now organizing themselves. And it's not just here at Amazon. We got emails from Walmart, we got emails from Target, Dollar General, from Apple, from Starbucks. We are going to take over the country. The workers are. The workers are going to take over the country.
Wonderful stuff. You know, hardly surprising to see that Amazon is engaging in that kind of union busting, following around organizers during their shift, ripping down any sort of posters, all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, they can put up their anti-union propaganda all throughout the bathrooms. They can have illegal cameras on illegal ballot boxes, right? They can control stoplights next to picketing workers, right? But we can't put a poster up, or God forbid we talk about the union on the floor. The other thing that I think is worth pointing out is Amazon will simultaneously try to use safety as an excuse to you know, do what they want, whether that's closing or sending workers home or whatever. Companies will use things like safety protocol as an excuse to manipulate things in their favor. And yet, what do they do by pulling people off of the line to go engage in these captive audience anti-union meetings, right? What do? They create a safety hazard, as they described at the beginning of that clip. So they want it both ways. You know, I've seen a number of Starbucks baristas say things like, you know, they decided to close the store the day that we were going to demonstrate outside, citing COVID issues, when for 2 years they haven't given a fuck about COVID issues and have insisted that we stay open. Like, all, you know, they'll conveniently utilize these kinds of policies and narratives in their favor, and Amazon appears to be doing that as well. But I'm inspired by Chris Smalls and his colleagues. And, you know, I think, going to be a successful movement. They're not necessarily going to win every single election, you guys. I mean, these are tough. Amazon is tough. You know, a lot of the locations also might be tough, but winning any significant portion, even winning one, is already a huge victory. So this is a turning point for this movement, and this is potentially the catalyst for the kinds of progressive changes that I think most of my audience joins me in desiring. So stand in full solidarity with workers everywhere, you guys. Amazon workers, Starbucks workers, minor league baseball players, whoever else in your community might be organizing or trying to stand up for themselves and wield some power. Please do stand with them in solidarity. Please do support them however you can, whether that's by contributing to mutual aid, whether that's demonstrating with them, not crossing the picket line, whether that's going into a Starbucks and expressing your support, saying the community has your back, whatever it might be. Make sure that you are supporting this labor movement across the country. And we'll close the labor update out with one more little cool story to show you guys here, a success, something to celebrate. Stephen Greenhouse tweets, breaking: undergraduate students at Grinnell College just won the first wall-to-wall undergraduate union in the United States in a landslide 327-6 vote. The union will cover every hourly student workplace, in dining halls, and everywhere on campus. This is a big deal. Undergraduate workers at Grinnell in Iowa vote 327-6 to become the first fully unionized undergraduate school in the U.S. This is the culmination of 5 years of organizing, the first step in winning the things that student workers need. So just another example, you guys, of something that's maybe a little bit outside of the box of what you would consider your typical unionizing effort, like an Amazon or a Walmart, right? The students here very much worthy of dignity as they engage in employment with the university. So just the sweeping nature of this push is inspiring and heartwarming, and I hope that you all can find some hope in it as I do. Please do support the labor movement however you possibly can. Once again, we'll plug at More Perfect US if you want to follow More Perfect Union. They are also on YouTube. They post their videos on the channel More Perfect Union on YouTube as well. Encourage you to follow and support their work. So we're going to go on to another positive story here. I'm sure a number of you are familiar with Steven Donziger and the battle that he had with Chevron that resulted in his being under house arrest for years. Fortunately, we have, oops, meant to share the screen and I unshared the screen. Here we go. We have a positive update on this. He has finally been released from house arrest. This is an Amnesty International. USA, after almost 1,000 days of arbitrary detention, Steven Donziger's release highlights urgent need for action against slaps. In response to the news that the unjust 6-month sentence of human rights defender and environmental lawyer Steven Donziger has been completed on the 25th of April, 2022, Daniel Joloi, senior policy advisor at Amnesty International, said, quote, "We are relieved that Steven Donziger will finally recover his freedom after almost 1,000 days of arbitrary detention, which included 45 days in prison and over 900 days under house arrest. He should have never been detained or for even one day, as it has been clear the whole process against him has been in retaliation for his human rights work that exposed corporate wrongdoings. Unfortunately, the end of the sentence does not mean the end of the injustices Steven has faced. The U.S. government must fully implement the decision of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, including launching an impartial and independent investigation into the circumstances that led to Steven's arbitrary detention, to prevent something like this from happening again, and to swiftly enact anti-SLAPP laws to protect those brave enough to call out corporate crimes. Corporations must not be allowed to continue abusing the U.S. justice system to silence and intimidate human rights defenders or anyone else exposing their wrongdoing." Just to give some of the basics there for those of you who were not aware, Steven Donziger sued Chevron on behalf of Ecuadorians who had seen their environment in the Amazon River polluted by Chevron and others, I'm sure, but Chevron was the target of this lawsuit. He won a huge settlement, and I don't remember the exact figure, but it was at the time historic, and probably still now historic. And Chevron fought back vociferously. So what they did is they essentially utilize the fact that our justice system is owned by the powerful, including corporations like Chevron, to make Steven's life hell and to come after him for things that were not improper. He was held in contempt of court, which you never see contempt, you guys. That's not supposed to carry 900 plus days, right? Contempt is supposed to be a very minor violation. So even if Stephen were guilty of the contempt charge, he should not have served almost 1,000 fucking days in prison and on house arrest. Of course, that was all trumped up anyway. And ridiculous claims to even get to the contempt issue. And Chevron also, it turned out that the judge who decided Stephen's fate brought in an independent attorney who turned out to actually work with the firm that Chevron employs. So Chevron's own lawyers got to come in and advise the court on what should happen to Stephen Donziger, and essentially got to prosecute Stephen Donziger for having the gall to go after them and succeed in going after them and their environmental abuses. So it's a positive step, but I think that Amnesty International is pretty spot on there when they note like this might be a positive step for Stephen's story in particular, but we haven't done anything to actually cut into the systemic problems here that resulted in Stephen being unjustly and arbitrarily detained for almost 1,000 days. So I would like to see some of those systemic issues cut into, and I hope that some action will be taken to disallow corporations like Chevron from using their leverage in our political system to basically intimidate other attorneys out of taking action against them, right? They should be just as susceptible to these kind of lawsuits as anyone. In fact, a company like Chevron, in my view, should be more susceptible to these kind of lawsuits because they are the ones most likely to abuse their power and most likely to need to be held accountable via those kinds of avenues, because our regulators are not going to do it, you guys. The EPA is been defanged, and it's, you know, every administration basically since who was it, Nixon put in the FDA, or I'm sorry, the EPA, you know, been defanged. So the regulators who are actually supposed to look out for environmental abuses are not entirely able to or willing to in different cases do that job. So you actually have to rely on random attorneys and human rights advocates like Stephen Donziger to come around and sue a Chevron to have any accountability whatsoever for their environmental and human rights abuses. And yet what they were able to do in this case could intimidate other attorneys and advocates from taking similar action. So I would love to see repercussions for Chevron here. I would love to see repercussions for the judge who allowed this to happen. And I would love to see more than anything changes, systemic changes, structural changes to the way that the law allows corporations like Chevron to intimidate and bully attorneys who come after them. So small piece of good news, but again, it needs to come with those actual structural changes to really mean a whole heck of a lot. But congratulations to Stephen, who very much deserves his freedom. And I hope that he will go on to continue to combat these kinds of corporations and be a force for good within our public discourse and things like that. Congratulations to Stephen, and I hope that some change will come of the public nature, of his case. I want to show you guys a clip here. This is Katie Porter, representative from California, who's kind of known for, on occasion, shredding corporate executives when she has the opportunity to question them. Of course, the Democrats took her off of one of the committees she was on that provided her with those opportunities. You know, huge shout out to Pelosi for that one, right? Standing with the corporate executives and you know, billionaires and business owners and those who engage in fraud and malpractice and etc. Standing with those people over the, you know, one of the rare members of Congress who on occasion actually tries to point it out during during questioning. Anyhow, the point is here, McKinsey had their hands in the in both sides of the coffer in a sense. They were both advising the FDA and advising makers of opioids. 22, by the way, just to be clear, I can't remember if they said it in this clip, but 22 people employed by McKinsey were found to have been working on both of these projects at the same time, consulting with both the FDA and with makers. I believe it was Purdue Pharma who makes Oxycontin. So we'll watch this line of questioning from Katie Porter, and then we'll come back and discuss.
What you conflict of interest czar for the United States government?
We're not the conflict of interest czar.
Okay, so let me ask you, did you disclose to the FDA your McKinsey's work at the same time? Did you disclose to the FDA that McKinsey was working at the same time it was working for the FDA, that it was working for Purdue? Did you disclose that to the FDA?
We made clear in multiple instances that the individuals involved had experience in both pharmaceuticals and opioids.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Sternfels, they didn't have experience. They were the identical humans working for both at the same time. Did you tell the FDA, did you make these disclosures and then allow the government to decide if there was a conflict of interest?
When we assessed the work request from the FDA, we brought professionals, our legal team, our dedicated government team, to understand first, is there a conflict of interest? We verified that the work was different.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Sternfels, that is you putting yourself as the czar of conflicts. Look, your scheme worked really well for McKinsey. McKinsey got contracts, Purdue got rich, and America got addicted. Since 2008, McKinsey earned $140 million in contracts from the FDA, and you did not ever disclose your work for Purdue. You did not disclose your conflicts of interest.
McKinsey, of course, well-known, notorious, cartoonishly sort of evil corporation or group that engages in consulting for all sorts of nefarious characters. And in this case, they get to profit off of what amounts to a brazen conflict of interest, as she kept saying. And then she would say, and it's a great point, what makes you the conflict of interest czar? Because he kept trying to say, well, we didn't think it was a conflict of interest. But it's not like up to you to decide. There are standards that the federal government enforces about conflict of interest in this case. So anyhow, the FDA, of course, is literally a government agency. There are standards about what is proper and improper, and he just kept trying to basically pretend, no, we get to say it wasn't a conflict of interest. Anyway, great job there pressing. I'm blanking on the guy's name, but he's their managing partner, or one of their managing partners. And it's a shame that the Democrats decided to take Katie Porter off of one of her committee assignments, because she would have a lot more opportunities to do that. She's famously, I'm sure a number of you have seen, when she brings the whiteboard out and starts putting figures up on the whiteboard and challenging CEOs and things like this. So she does a pretty fantastic job at that stuff a lot of the time, and including the interaction there with McKinsey. I do just want to note, though, you guys, and I'm going to sound like a fucking broken record here because of the segments that we did earlier, but when she tweeted about this, she said something about tax dollars going to McKinsey. And guys, seriously, I'm going to come in bald one of these times, just ripping my fucking hair out watching all these people talk about taxpayer dollars. It's functionally inaccurate, and it plays right into our opponent's hands. The framing of saying tax to spend at the federal level plays right into the conservative hands. And it drives me nuts to see people continuing to engage in that kind of rhetoric, especially people like Bernie and Katie Porter and Briahna Joy Gray, right? Who I all largely support and think largely do good things and good work and are good faith actors. But please, you guys, please stop calling it taxpayer dollars. It's public dollars, federal spending. Can we beat that into your heads? Please. Have I made that clear? Please. Anyhow. Wonderful job there of grilling him on the conflict of interest and how McKinsey has reaped profits off of those kinds of conflicts. And of course, this also means that the Purdue family got to benefit, because who's supposed to regulate them, right? The FDA is supposed to regulate them, but now they have this handy little hookup where 22 different people at McKinsey are doing their bidding within the FDA as they consult for the FDA. So it's not just McKinsey that gets to profit off of this conflict of interest. It's also the Sackler family at Purdue Pharma who get to profit off of this kind of conflict of interest. And they also very cartoonishly evil, as I called McKinsey earlier. So, good job there from Katie Porter, and shame on McKinsey for doing the same kind of shit that they're doing constantly. Anyhow, we have a Wall Street corruption story to bring you all here. This has to do with some securities fraud that has recently been uncovered. This is in Reuters. It's by Jody Godoy. U.S. pension fund sues Credit Suisse board over losses in Archegos collapse. A Rhode Island pension fund has sued Credit Suisse Group AG former chairman Urs Rohner, I am so sorry I butchered that one bad, and 19 other directors and executives, alleging their failure to manage risk doomed the bank's prime brokerage business to fail with the collapse of Archegos Capital. The lawsuit filed in New York Supreme Court on Tuesday seeks to claw back compensation from the 20 defendants on behalf of the company, which lost $5.5 billion in the Archegos meltdown. The employees' retirement system for the city of Providence alleged that the officers and directors were negligent under Swiss law, and their failures left the brokerage vulnerable when Archegos imploded a year ago. Quote, the fundamental problem was that CS's board did not provide the resources. Jesus Christ, you guys, I'm really struggling to read today. People, technology, systems, and controls needed to comprehend the overall risk the bank was taking on, much less manage that risk, the retirement fund said. Credit Suisse declined to comment on the lawsuit on Friday. Archegos, which had $36 billion in assets, imploded last year when it was caught short on highly leveraged trades. Just to give you an idea, they were leveraged about $100 billion. So that was a pretty extraordinary collapse that happened roughly a year ago. The scandal sparked a fire sale in stocks, including Viacom, CBS, and Discovery Inc., and caused Credit Suisse, Nomura Holdings, and other lenders to lose billions on their trades with Archegos. Archegos founder Bill Wang and Chief Financial Officer Patrick Halligan were released on bail on Wednesday after being charged with fraud and racketeering for lying to banks about the family office's holdings. Wang was also charged with stock manipulation. Both pleaded not guilty to the charges. And it's worth noting that Bill Wang, or however you pronounce it, the Archegos founder, had been accused of doing exactly this kind of thing previously. So, and then he just found a new scheme to continue engaging in it. So what they essentially would do is, in a somewhat complicated way, they would pump up their own securities, and this was beneficial to their investments. But what their whole scheme was based upon is that there was a constant growth, and as soon as that growth was disrupted by the pandemic, it all came crashing down because it was a scheme, right? It's a house of cards. So it's incredible that we allow the kind of white-collar crime in this country that we allow, and that we allow somebody who was known to have committed fraud in the past to once again be put in a position to commit more fraud. And this lawsuit is just kind of a result of that crash and the Archegos securities fraud that occurred, culminated a year ago. So it's just incredible, you guys, what Wall Street gets to get away with on a regular basis. It's incredible how they are constantly breaking the rules and allowed to break the rules because there's never any consequence for them for doing so. There's never any accountability for them for doing so. What happens is if they lose their ass, they often get bailed out. This a rare instance where they actually, a couple people got arrested after the housing crash in 2008. The only people that we arrested, I think it was like a dozen like bank managers, like local managers who were only taking instruction from higher ups, right? So there's no consequences often for the conduct, the rapacious, fraudulent, illegal conduct that these bankers and investors pretty consistently engage in. And Archegos there, no different. So, we'll keep up on Wall Street's malpractices and illegal conduct as we see them come up. But unfortunately, that is an all too common and constant thing in our society, isn't it? Good reporting there from Reuters. And again, we'll keep up on those stories. We'll follow the prosecution of those two as well. I have a piece here from Real Progressives that I want to read you guys a part of. Once again, want to encourage everybody to go to realprogressives.org if you'd like to find our content, including articles like this one from Artemis. So we're going to dive in here. It's by Artemis Douglas, Permanent Capital Captures Housing. Quote here from Isaac Asimov. No one can possibly have lived through the Great Depression without being scarred by it. No amount of experience since the Depression can convince someone who has lived through it that the world is safe economically. Economically speaking, the very fabric of capitalism requires economic booms and busts. This boom-bust cycle, as it is called, is taught in economics as a macroeconomic constant, the way of things, and that it must be anticipated for but never solved. In other words, the idea of solving the cycle is deliberately made to be unseen. Of course, it is relatively easy for an organized working class to end the boom-bust cycle and achieve wonders. Look at the organized workers of the Soviet Union socialist republics who collectivized and industrialized food production and ended the seasonal famines that had plagued their countrymen for most of history. fact, if it weren't for the reactionary capitalism loyal kulaks who hoarded as much of the grain as they could and burned the rest, the so-called Holodomor famine would have never happened. Even if it had, without reactionary interference to the Soviet systems and plans in place, far fewer lives would be lost. In other words, fascist interference was the cause of the Holodomor in both famine and devastation. Another example from the USSR would be the Soviets working collectively and bringing their agrarian peasant feudal society into the space age in 3 decades and beating the good old USA at every space race metric except a manned moon landing. However, in the USA, capitalism is never blamed for the Great Depression or the Dust Bowl famine that accompanied and worsened the Depression. If we blame Stalin and the USSR's path to socialism for the famines of their time, why don't we likewise blame FDR and the USA's contemporary stage of capitalism? The Great Depression was the largest formally recognized economic crisis in the history of the Euro-colonial industrialized world. It remains so because it hurt the capitalists then, and collective memory of its conditions helps them now. The American dream has long been defined by home ownership. Unlike Cuba, Laos, the USSR, China, and North Korea, where home ownership is a right and land reforms were a cornerstone of post-revolutionary government programs, in the USA, one must work to earn a living, including access to the monies required to access home ownership. Basic human needs are not guaranteed as basic human rights in the United States, which stands in direct contrast to every current and former socialist project. In the United States now, the year 2022, it is painfully obvious to most working people and even so-called middle-class people that homeownership is increasingly out of reach. Without class analysis, however, they'll never understand why or what purpose the lack of access to home ownership serves. Permanent capital, including capitalist conspiracies such as firms like BlackRock, has been snapping up homes above the already inflated market values and making home ownership impossible even to those who accumulated a meager enough amount of capital to bid for a home under the constraints of American capitalism. Well, the former constraints. It no longer serves the ruling class capitalists any purpose to allow us to own our homes or land, and it truly never has. The difference is now they have the regulatory capture and other material conditions in place to sweep homeownership off the tapestry of possibilities. If you think this is outlandish, consider the following comparisons. First, in 1931, at the lowest wage point of the Great Depression, the average worker's actual pay was $22.51 a week. The current federal minimum wage, or the highest wage the capitalists that control the United States government believe workers deserve as a price floor, a full-time worker would make a total wage of $290 a week. Factoring inflation from 1931 to now, and the 1931 Great Depression worker made $425.77 a week in actual take-home wages of today's dollars. Because the average tax wedge is roughly 34.6% of the actual earnings of a modern minimum wage worker, today is $215.76. In sum, despite 2 successive presidents, Trump and Biden, claiming unprecedented economic recoveries, the modern American worker is guaranteed to make no more than 50.6% of their Great Depression counterpart. Compounding this is the price of home ownership. In 1931, the median price in 1931 dollars of a home was $5,609, which was roughly 249 and a half weeks of work at the 1931 wage price floor. In other words, even the poorest workers of the Great Depression only needed 4.79 years, of income to buy a median home for their time. The adjusted for inflation value in 2022 of the median 1931 home would be roughly $106,092. The actual median price of a 2022 home in the USA, $390,000. At the wage price floor, that's 1,807 and a half weeks of work to buy a house, or 34.75 years of working at the wage price floor. The home buying assumptions above assume 100% of a worker's income being spent on a home. If one were to use the 30% rule, the budget gurus in many apartment complexes use, wherein housing should cost no more than 30% of your income, those assumptions change as follows. I just want to quickly note, they used to say 25%, and then that became so unrealistic that now the standard is 30%. You really should only be spending 20 or 25% of your income on housing if you want to have a decent budget, and yet most workers cannot possibly pull that off, right? That's part of how we're exploited. Anyway, carrying on here. The 1931 worker making the wage floor of earnings would need 830.6 weeks of work to buy a median 1931 home, which is just under 16 years. The 2022 worker making the wage floor of earnings would need 6,025 weeks of work to buy a median 2022 home, which is 115.87 years. That's 38.87 years longer than the average American lives. In much simpler terms, home ownership is now impossible for the average American. Of course, that's how the capitalists won it. Homes have been scrutinized thanks to capitalist conspiracies that take the form of firms like BlackRock. Capitalists get much more money and, more importantly, control of the social order by making us all permanent renters. Rest of the piece there was also terrific. Encourage you all to give it a read. Once again, realprogressives.org for all of our fantastic content, and huge shout out to Artemis there for such a fantastic piece. Essentially, you guys, it's like, you saw the numbers there, right? You used to be able to actually, potentially own a home on a minimum wage job. You used to actually have the prospects of having a decent life making minimum wage. And now that's just an impossibility. And people are now pissing away more in rent than they used to be spending on home ownership, which makes it incredibly difficult for younger generations to find themselves in an economically stable situation. So, great work from Artemis. And also the point about BlackRock, you guys, who can afford then when the market dips to buy up all the fucking excess and wait for the market to grow again and make profit off of it? Who can afford that? So every time we have one of these bust cycles in capitalism that Artemis was talking about, then the BlackRocks of the world, the billionaires of the world, get to sweep in and buy up a whole bunch of property, and then they can rent it off once, to make income or sell it when the market's higher. So who gets to profit from that boom bust system, and who is left to be screwed by it? That's a question you should always be asking yourself as it pertains to any sort of political issues. And it's often, by the way, just hint, the billionaire class is almost always benefiting. Who would have thought, right? Who would have thought? Great piece from Artemis, realprogressives.org for more of our fantastic articles and content. I want to talk a little bit here about that $33 billion in military aid going to Ukraine. I have a tweet here I want to show you guys. This is from regular guest on this show, good politic guy. He says $33 billion is roughly 3 times the cost of Biden's free community college plan we were told was too expensive. Also, the next 5 months of war, are we just not even pretending to push for diplomacy? This, of course, in response to the $33 billion proposal that they say, here's the quote, admin says, this is what's needed to enable Ukraine's success for next 5 months of this war. So great point from Mac that so we're just anticipating 5 months of war. We're not even trying to participate in diplomacy here at all. And he also points out that that's 3 times what Biden's community college plan would have cost, and we were told that was too expensive. So again, back to that MMT theme, you guys, budgets express priorities. When someone will spend $33 billion on military aid that they refuse to spend on educating their own people, they're telling you what they care about more. When they tell you that we can't afford to spend to educate our own people, they're both lying to you and telling you that they care more about continuing to, throw fuel on the flames in Ukraine. So I'll re-express my opinion, you guys, and I know it's a controversial one that I think that, largely speaking, providing military aid to Ukraine is escalatory and not de-escalatory. I think that it provides a false sense of hope to Zelensky and the Ukrainian government that they can survive a little longer. I think that if we continue to allow them to have that false hope, I don't see any sort of diplomatic settlement coming to fruition. And as Chomsky said, you guys, there's 2 ways to end a war. Either one side's going to be destroyed or you're going to come to a diplomatic settlement. I think that every serious analyst acknowledges Russia's not going to be destroyed here. So if you're going to go by the first route, Ukraine's going to be destroyed. We instead should be focusing on diplomatic settlement, and I don't think that continuing to pump weapons into the situation is working towards that end. And Mac is spot on there, pointing out that the framing of this, that is to pay for the next 5 months, is also to kind of undermine the claims that there is attempts at diplomatic settlement here on behalf of NATO and the West. So once again, those budgets explain priorities, and Joe Biden making his priorities quite clear. I also wanted to get into a piece here. This is by the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, and they talk a little bit about how the media, how the narratives that we see on this are quite skewed. Surprise. Ex-general pushing for NATO troops in Ukraine has weapons industry ties. I know this is a theme that I keep going back to when we talk about Ukraine, you guys, or really any foreign policy issue, but I think it is important, and I think it's one of the core issues involved in any of these discussions. So, retired U.S. General Philip Breedlove wants to escalate the military conflict with Russia, but media outlets don't disclose he works for defense firms. This by Eli Clifton. Weapons companies and military contractors stand to book new orders and enjoy heightened demand for new weapon systems as the United States and NATO countries scale up spending in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Coincidentally or not, one of the most, excuse me just a second. Apologies. Coincidentally or not, one of the most high-profile advocates for dramatically escalating NATO's involvement in the war, literally calling for putting troops and arms inside Ukraine, quietly moonlights as a consultant for weapons firms and defense contractors, interests that presumably stand to benefit from a direct conflict between NATO and Russia. More importantly, that conflict of interest hasn't been disclosed in any of his media appearances or interviews. On Sunday, retired U.S. General and former top NATO commander General Philip Breedlove told the Times of London, quote, "So what could West do? Well, right now, there are no Russian troops west of the Dnieper River. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. So why don't we put NATO troops into Western Ukraine to carry out humanitarian missions and to set up a forward arms supply base?" So in other words, why don't we involve ourselves with feet on the ground? I mean, oh my God, you guys, oh my God. The escalation of NATO boots on the ground inside Ukraine would make NATO a direct participant in the war, dramatically increase the likelihood of Russian attacks on NATO personnel and facilities, and raise the risk of a nuclear conflict. Obviously, that shouldn't even need to be said. Breedlove, whom the Times notes is advising the Biden administration on Ukraine, also works as a consultant for the weapons industry, a fact which the Times did not disclose. Also fascinating that Biden's Secretary of Defense was on the board of Raytheon, for fuck's sake. It's hardly surprising that his foreign policy team also is making money from defense contractors. According to Breedlove's LinkedIn profile, he works as a senior advisor to Culpeper National Security Solutions, a firm that the Washington Post's David Ignatius wrote about in 2019 in the wake of Jamal Khashoggi's murder in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Ignatius writes, "A U.S. plan to train and modernize the Saudi intelligence service is also on hold pending State Department approval of a license. This project was developed by Culpeper National Security Solutions, a unit of DynCorp, with help from some prominent former CIA officials. No work on the project has been done." DynCorp was a scandal-plagued military contractor with an expertise in military flight operations support, whose primary client was the U.S. government until its acquisition last year by Amentum, a company that boasts of its, quote, "deep relationships with customers in the U.S. Department of Defense and Department of Energy." Breedlove is also promoted as an advisor at Stellar Solutions, a consultancy that markets itself to clients needing expertise in coalition operations and expert solutions for Department of Defense customers related to space and missile systems of national protection and security. In other words, since retiring from the Air Force, Breedlove associated himself with firms that either directly profit from military contracts like DynCorp or market themselves as effective consultants for defense contractors seeking to manage their relationships with the U.S. government. Breedlove may genuinely believe that a direct military confrontation with Russia and the heightened risk of nuclear war is necessary, but his downplaying the risks of boots on the ground dovetails nicely with his consulting work for industry interests that stand to benefit from increased U.S. and European defense spending. So again, it just fits a pattern, you guys, of the media propping up voices who stand to profit from escalation here, and then refusing to mention that their advocacy for that escalation might have a conflict of interest. And these are the types of characters who it's not just around the margins, you guys. That's one thing I really want to make clear. This isn't like the occasional guest on cable news has this kind of conflict of interest. The people who drive foreign policy narrative in this country have these conflicts of interest. The fucking Secretary of Defense right now, the sitting Secretary of Defense, came fresh off of Raytheon's board. These are the people who drive the conversation. Okay. So, and Bolton is they still parade Bolton up there as though he's a fucking expert, you guys. He's the epitome of like the cartoonish war hawk, and they parade him up there, John Bolton, as though he is still some sort of expert, right? It's another one of those areas, you guys, where you can spend your entire career being incredibly wrong and wrong about harmful things, costing people their lives and their livelihood and their land and their power and their control. And then you end up just being treated like you've always been right. What Breedlove is advocating for here would put us at war with Russia. It's like those people who are advocating for a no-fly zone. It would put us at war with Russia. And you're going to continue to see these kinds of voices squawk in favor of that kind of escalation and getting more and more involved without disclosing to you or the platforms that they're on, or, by the way, the administration that they're currently advising on policy, that they are making money from the arms dealers who stand to benefit from those decisions. So just always worth keeping front and center as we discuss Ukraine and any other foreign policy instance, that there is a particular group of people who drive these narratives, and those are the very people who benefit and profit from war. And one more piece here. I've talked a little bit about my views on sanctions and how I view them as also being escalatory and ineffective. This is a piece in National Interest. It's by Asal Rod. Should sanctioning countries be blamed for causing human suffering? If states are responsible for the consequences of war, then we are also responsible for the consequences of economic warfare. Despite the fact that there is much literature and evidence on the ineffectiveness of broad-based sanctions, the United States continues to expand their use. The cases of Cuba, which has been under U.S. embargo for 6 decades, or Iran, which has been heavily sanctioned by the United States for over 40 years, are just 2 glaring examples of how these policies have failed to alter the behaviors that sanctions are meant to target. In addition to being overused and rarely successful, broad-based sanctions are a particularly cruel policy that disproportionately and adversely impacts innocent civilians. So then who is responsible in a so-called international order based on rules and accountability for the suffering inflicted upon millions of people? We know sanctions hurt civilians. Given that we know such sanctions are often ineffective and that we are aware of their human cost, there's little room for plausible deniability. In fact, when confronted with the reality of mass human suffering, U.S. officials justify these policies and forge ahead. Of course, there's the infamous clip of former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright in 1996 stating that a policy causing the death of 500,000 Iraqi children was worth it. The case of Iraq is revealing, given that the supposed target of U.S. sanctions was Saddam Hussein, a leader that the United States had armed and supported as he gassed Iranians in the 1980s after invading Iran. That part often, by the way, left out of the discussion of Iraq, isn't it? However, because the target of his misdeeds was Iran, Saddam was not sanctioned or held accountable for those crimes until it was politically fitting for the United States to do so in the wake of his invasion of Kuwait in 1990 and the ensuing Gulf War. While sanctions decimated Iraqi society, they enriched Saddam, and he remained in power until the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. With no sense of irony, President George W. Bush recalled Saddam's chemical attacks in the 1980s as part of his justification for the war. Knowledge of the impact of, oh, by the way, we used chemical weapons in Iraq. That's just maybe a piece that we should add to that. The knowledge of the impact of countrywide sanctions continues to this day. In April 2020, then candidate Joe Biden issued a statement on the Trump administration's sanctions on Iran. In the statement, Biden acknowledged that humanitarian goods were exempt from sanctions, but also acknowledged that in reality, U.S. sanctions were impeding the flow of essential goods to Iran, one of the countries hardest hit early in the coronavirus pandemic. While Biden called on the Trump administration to take immediate steps to address the issue, his own administration is yet to heed those words. The impact of such large-scale sanctions is well known within the international community as well, which is why human rights experts from the United Nations called for lifting sanctions in light of the COVID-19 pandemic that were bringing suffering and death to innocent people. Again, having knowledge of the impact of sanctions on civilians and the impact on the global efforts to combat the pandemic, the United States did not relent or ease sanctions. Instead, the United States doubled down on sanctions, increasing them during the pandemic despite those calls. After a 20-year U.S. war that failed to eradicate the Taliban in Afghanistan, U.S. policies such as sanctions, freezing billions of dollars of Afghan central bank assets, and egregious decisions by the Biden administration to seize billions of dollars of Afghan central bank assets to give to 9/11 families, we covered that extensively, have wreaked havoc to Afghanistan's economy, causing widespread starvation. In all these cases, U.S. policies continued unabated with the full knowledge of their impact on civilians. In fact, for some proponents of punitive sanctions, the intended goal is to hurt people in order to bring pressure on a populace to act against its own government. In 2018, as the Trump administration implemented maximum pressure sanctions on Iran, And news stories indicated the impact of sanctions on food and medicine, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo suggested that Iranian officials would have to choose between changing their behavior as the United States sees fit, or if their people will eat. Pompeo also suggested that the Iranian people would respond themselves and used moments of protest in Iran to rhetorically lend support while sanctioning them into poverty. Notice, by the way, I mean, just flip that narrative. Imagine if the United States was sanctioned to oblivion, and then imagine if China sanctioned us to oblivion, or some power somehow managed to sanction the United States into oblivion, and then said to us, oh, your people are starving? I guess you'll have to choose between bending to our will and letting them starve. I mean, seriously, just imagine the response from the United States State Department and Pentagon and from cable news and mainstream press outlets. What would the New York Times or the Washington Post write about that? What would they say on CNN? What would the State Department say about that? And yet we just casually cast that out there as though, oh yeah, no, we're just trying to starve Iranian and Russian civilians so that they'll put pressure on their government. As though, by the way, that's even remotely effective. It's not. It doesn't do anything. At least not to the end that we purport that it does. What it does do is it harms innocent civilians. That's what it does. And disproportionately poor civilians, by the way. Who is first hit by price increases? The poorest people, the people who can't barely afford basic needs. And I also want to point out, and I've pointed this out previously about sanctions to you guys, there are often routes for oligarchs, billionaires, whatever you want to call them, the wealthiest, most powerful people in our society. There are often ways for domestic policy to be manipulated by these folks to deflect the damages from these sanctions onto people below them economically. There are often mechanisms that they can use to do that. So wonderful piece there. They're not effective. They're harmful. And I think we should start at least having that be a part of the conversation about sanctions. Because you guys, this is what bothers me more than anything, is that when this topic comes up, it is treated in this country as though the only two options are like a hot nuclear war with Russia or sanctions. Anything outside of those two options is not even treated as a possibility. And that's what bothers me. So this part of the discussion needs to become part of the main, broad discussion, part of the actual public discourse surrounding the response to Russia's invasion. Wonderful piece there on sanctions, and I wanted to make sure not to miss that. Make sure to keep the military-industrial complex angle front and center as well, as we covered there with the Quincy Institute piece. And just want to shout them out real quick. The Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, they do some great work on foreign policy. If you're not familiar with their work, I encourage you to look into it. So that is the Ukraine aid situation. I want to show you guys a clip here. I'm sure a number of you have seen this story. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis continuing to combat Disney. I've stayed away from this because I think in many ways it's the exact kind of story that the powers that be want us to focus on. I think it's the exact kind of demagoguery that divides us over culture issues that they bank on, and therefore I have kind of avoided it. But DeSantis here making some claims that I just feel the need to comment on. I'm sure a number of you saw this video, but this is DeSantis talking about the evolution of Disney movies and animated films and children's movies and things. So this is some absolute nonsense here from Ron DeSantis. We'll watch this clip and then come back and discuss.
The things that really bugged me were these Zoom videos with all these people that are high up in Disney talking about how it was their intention to inject sexuality into the programming for these very young kids. And so my wife and I, we're thinking to ourselves, when we were young, you could watch cartoons without having to worry. Now parents have to sit there and worry about what are they trying to inject in? What type of ideology are they trying to pursue? And that is wrong.
Sorry about that, guys. You saw the clip there. I just want to point out, and this is actually what I tweeted about this too. How many times, especially in Ron DeSantis's youth, did Disney do the whole oh, we're going to have a teenage girl with an adult male thing? Was that wholesome family values, Ron? That wasn't sexuality coming into play, right? It's rank homophobia. It is rank bigotry against the LGBTQ community on behalf of Ron DeSantis. And here's the other kicker, you guys. I might be wrong about this, but I don't really think the guy gives a shit. I think he recognizes that he can exploit this, like I mentioned before that clip. I think he views this as useful demagoguery for his political ends. And I think that kind of makes it worse. In a sense anyway, because it's trivializing a very serious issue, and it's sort of minimizing and weaponizing a very serious issue to your own selfish political ends. But the idea, you guys, that the thing about Disney that we should be condemning or criticizing is the occasional instance of inclusion. Are you fucking kidding me? Yeah, like Walt Disney is notoriously what? What's the first thing that comes to your mind if I say Walt Disney? If it's not anti-Semitism, you've been paying no attention. So Ron DeSantis has no problem with that. That's fine. Totally fine. But how dare you show a gay couple? Are you fucking kidding me? That's what he takes issue with, right? This horrific, exploitative, bigoted company that has engaged in this stuff for decades. And what Ron has a problem with is that they occasionally have an inclusive storyline. And by the way, never ceases to amaze me how the same people who cry snowflake at any time a leftist gives a shit about another human being. Oh, you fucking snowflake, you care? Those same people turn around and bitch and moan because there's a gay couple in a Disney film. They turn around and bitch and moan about Dr. Seuss or the genderless potato head. They are the ultimate snowflakes. You will not find a less secure person than the religious right. You just won't. I'm sorry. I'm just going to call it like it is. You won't find someone more easily offended, more sensitive, less secure, more pathetic than the religious right. Tell them you think their religion or their politics are wrong and see how they fucking respond. Okay? Tell them you don't want religion in school. See how they respond. Talk about evolution. See how they respond. Tell them you want their kids to learn sex ed. See how they respond. They're the ultimate snowflakes. They're the most precious little pathetic fucking snowflakes among us, for Christ's sake. And Ron gets up there and does this little show. Meanwhile, they call themselves the free speech warriors. I mean, you guys, if anyone hasn't gotten this part through their head yet, I don't know what to tell you. The fact that such a significant portion of this country falls for this kind of storyline would sort of lead me to believe that we're on a path towards doom, that we are that easily manipulated, that people look at Ron DeSantis as a serious human being. I mean, good God, you guys, we're going to have a 2024. I'm just telling you right now, we're going to have a 2024 Republican primary between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. That's where this country's at. And on the Democratic side, we're going to have a corpse. That's what we have. That's the state of politics in this country right now. Ron DeSantis absolutely beclowns himself once again. And again, you guys, I've stayed away from that for the reasons I described before we showed that clip. I think that this is the kind of narrative that is used to divide us. I think this is the kind of story that is used to deflect from working class issues, from the actual class issues that matter. But I felt the need to comment on it because he went so far with it. I just felt the need to comment on that. If you take Ron DeSantis seriously, please seek help. Seek medical, psychiatric help if you think that is a serious human being in any way, shape, or form. We have a clip, or I'm sorry, a article here. This is in the Economic Policy Institute, and it's about how price gouging is a driver of inflation, despite what the mainstream media might want you to think. Oh, God damn it, you guys. I keep screwing up my StreamYard here. I apologize. Give me just 1 second. Here we go. Again, Economic Policy Institute wrote this fantastic piece. It's by Josh Bivens. Corporate profits have contributed disproportionately to inflation. How should policymakers respond? The inflation spike of 2021 and 2022 has presented real policy challenges. In order to better understand this policy debate, it is imperative to look at prices and how they are being affected. The price of just about everything in the U.S. economy can be broken down into the three main components of cost. These include labor costs, non-labor inputs, and the markup of profits over the first two components. Good data on these separate cost components exist for the non-financial corporate sector, those companies that produce goods and services of the economy, which make up roughly 75% of the entire private sector. Since the trough of COVID-19 recession in the second quarter of 2020, overall prices in the NFC sector have risen at an annualized rate of 6.1%, a pronounced acceleration over the 1.8% price growth that characterized the pre-pandemic business cycle of 2007 to 2019. Strikingly, over half of this increase can be attributed to fatter profit margins, with labor costs contributing less than 8% of this increase. This is not normal. From 1979 to 2019, profits only contributed about 11% to price growth and labor costs over 60%, as shown in Figure A below. Non-labor inputs, a decent indicator for supply chain snarls, are also driving up prices more than usual in the current economic recovery. So, show you guys this chart here. You can see there is an increase in the non-labor input costs. So that's the supply chain stuff, right? So you've seen about a 10% increase over that. What were they giving us? A 12-year trend. So the last 2 years have seen about a 10% increase in non-labor costs compared to that 12-year trend. But look at the other two, okay? The labor cost is way down, down like down 70 some percent. I'm sorry, down 50 some percent. And the corporate profits here, look at that. They were sitting at 11.4 on average annual from 2007 to 2019, and now they're at 54%. So this is data, wonderful reporting here from the EPI that sort of debunks a lot of the mainstream rhetoric surrounding price increases. And we've covered previously how, like, I think it was a Qasim Rashid tweet where he basically said, like, this is price gouging. This is not some sort of macroeconomic, pressure. This isn't some sort of actual inflation or supply chain issues that are causing this. What this is corporations deciding to scrape more profits off the top. When he said this, Facebook started putting out, I'm sure you guys remember this, I'm going back a few months, but Facebook and I think Twitter too started putting out, well, our fact checkers disagree with this. Well, your fact checkers were fucking wrong, to the surprise of absolutely nobody. It's hardly surprising that Twitter and Facebook would decide to engage in that kind of censorship, to harken back to the earlier story about the Twitter takeover. But it's no less deceitful that they engaged in that kind of propaganda, and the Economic Policy Institute there finding the data to prove that us on the left who called it price gouging were correct to do so. This also applies, by the way, with prices at the pump, you guys. Biden trying to blame Putin for those increases. What it really is the Exxons and Chevrons of the world getting to getting to price gouge further because of their market power, which Fadl talked about earlier in the article that we read about MMT. But if you look at the barrel price for oil, it's actually gone down recently, and yet the price at the pump has been relatively stagnant. So they're just scraping more profits off the top. They're just price gouging. It's market power that they are using to their benefit and to our detriment. That's all that there is to it. Wonderful piece from the Economic Policy Institute. Do not fall for the rhetoric that inflation is some sort of natural economic or like organic economic factor, that it is somehow a pressure that is not, a choice of these corporations to simply engage in price gouging, because that's exactly what it is. All right, guys, we got a couple of things to go into here about how crime is reported. I often cover this particular topic. We're going to show you a tweet here from Alec Caracat-Sanis, who I always encourage my audience to follow, @EqualityAlec on Twitter. He does fantastic work revealing this kind of stuff. You will probably remember the Patrick Loyola case from maybe a month ago. He was shot in the back of the head by a cop during a traffic stop. Alec tweets out here, I'm having a hard time getting over the New York Times story about the police execution of Patrick Loyola in the back of the head. New York Times literally talks about how the cop had helped widows and orphans and contains a wedding photo of the cop surrounded by African children. You guys, you cannot make this stuff up. Mr. Schur and the others built houses for widows, played with orphans, and visited residents. Oh, fucking A. You can see the picture here. Oh, look. Okay. He can't possibly be racist, right? Oh, nauseating coverage. Absolutely nauseating. Shame on the New York Times for that one. Imagine, by the way, you guys, like, what if they went and found, I'm sure you could go find a time that, like, Vladimir Putin was nice to his neighbor or something, or like donated to a charity or something like that. Why don't they go cover that? Why isn't every Ukraine piece where they mention Putin, why don't they put a little side note? By the way, here's the time he was like nice to his neighbor. That you see how obvious and brazen and intentional the framing rather is, and when they choose to frame something in this way, as opposed to when they choose to frame someone as just a bad guy. It reminds me of, I'm sure you guys are familiar with some of the comparisons between how black and white defendants are treated in stories. So you'll often see like a mug shot of a black defendant, whereas with a white defendant, you'll see like a picture of them with their family or something, all of this sort of creates a perception of the legal system, of police, of the black community, of the impoverished communities, etc., that is very convenient for police and for conservative political advocates. Those who want to see increases to police funding and power lean on these kinds of narratives, and the press are often all too happy to play stenographer. So the New York Times here doing exactly that, and framing a murderer as someone who helped widows and orphans. The guy shot a man in the back of the head during a traffic stop. That's what matters. Okay? You can take the most cartoonishly evil villain in the world, and I'm sure you could go find a nice thing that person has done. Is that what matters? Is that what matters? We all know it's not, but the New York Times intentionally and brazenly framing things in favor of this murderer, this violent thug. So who we choose to give a badge to and a gun. Really healthy society we got here, isn't it? We got one more here from Alec. This is in response to a tweet saying a Sacramento police officer beat and choked his girlfriend, pointed a gun at her, and said he'd have her killed and disposed of in a lake unless she got an abortion. Sacramento DA Anne Marie Schubert failed to prosecute until Chesa Boudin stepped in, the current Sacramento DA. So Alec responds here, the casual news reader often misses, because the news misleads them, that tough on crime prosecutors are only tough against some crimes committed by some people. A big part of their identity is to be soft on crime by cops and rich people. So you see all this fear-mongering about crime, low-level crime in New York, in San Francisco, oh God, the subway, etc., etc. You see all this fear-mongering about that stuff. Do you ever see fear-mongering about like white-collar crime or asset forfeiture, or how police kill and brutalize people, or any of that stuff? Did you know police seize more in asset forfeiture than burglars steal in a given year? Do you ever see that crime discussed? The rampant crime by police? Do you ever see reports on that? How they kill over 1,000 people a year? Do you ever see the New York Times fear-mongering about, alarming escalation in violence committed by police? No. It's always like, druggies, crime, all these druggies are doing more drugs. We got to crack down, throw more money at the police, right? So I like how Alec frames that. The casual news reader often misses because the news misleads them. So he's not putting it on the reader. He's saying you're being lied to. And I really appreciate that element of it too. Really disgusting framing from the media as it pertains to all of this stuff. And I have a piece here in Mother Jones about San Francisco's crime rhetoric that I'd like to bring to you all. This is by Eamon Whalen. A San Francisco public defender explains what the media are getting wrong about the crime wave, quote unquote crime wave. Peter Calloway on perception versus reality of what's happening under District Attorney Chesa Boudin. Oh, I'm sorry. That's their little plug. You've heard it on Fox News. No, in the New York Times. Wait, actually, that was the Wall Street Journal. Or was it the Bay Area ABC News affiliate? One thing much of the media can agree on these days is that crime is rampant in San Francisco. But wait, is it? The liberal bastion has been painted as a city under siege. It has taken center stage in the country's nationwide debate about criminal justice policy as District Attorney Chesa Boudin, elected in 2019 on a mandate of curbing mass incarceration, faces a second attempt to recall him from office. The narrative promoted by Boudin's opponents is that his approach, doing things like ending cash bail and focusing on expanding diversion programs, incentivizes would-be criminals and is characteristic of a broader failure of progressive governance that has turned big liberal cities into lawless wastelands. A Substack devoted to adversarial coverage of Boudin, launched through the crowdfunding efforts of a rich tech guy, calls itself predictably Gotham. can't make this up, you guys. I can't help myself but give you a little anecdote here. I was away with some buddies for a weekend, a month ago or something like that. And one of the things we did was we went and saw that new Batman movie. And I couldn't get through the first 15 minutes of it, you guys, because it was just such rank, brazen pro-police propaganda. And so the fact that they call this project of pro-police propaganda Gotham, you just can't, that's just too on the nose, too spot on. Anyway, carrying on. But the real picture is complicated. Earlier this month, Peter Calloway, a San Francisco deputy public defender and a resident of the Tenderloin neighborhood, where earlier this year, citing drug overdoses, Mayor London Breed declared a state of emergency, went viral for a tweet thread that showed just how little basis the narrative has in reality. A week later, the San Francisco Chronicle backed Calloway up with even more statistics, writing, quote, "The data shows that crime shifted dramatically during the pandemic, but now that San Francisco is returning to pre-pandemic behavior, so are its crime rates." It's worth noting that cities with more old-school law and order prosecutors, including Sacramento, where District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert, who you just saw referenced, who is running for State Attorney General on a more lock-them-up approach governs, aren't safe havens. In 2020, 8 out of 10 of the states with the highest murder rates were controlled by Republicans. So if crime is up everywhere, and even those upticks were overstated, why are Boudin and other criminal justice reformers facing such intense opposition? They show Peter's thread there. Last week, I called Calloway, who joined the SFPD office in 2018, to talk about what criminal justice reform advocates would expect out of progressive prosecutors, the national implications of the Boudin recall, and how the media are part of hyping a crime surge. And they go on to show the interview there. Wonderful piece there in the San Francisco. I'm sorry, that was in Mother Jones. They cited there the report in the San Francisco Chronicle. So that's right along the lines of what Alec is often talking about, you guys, is that this is all framed in a very one-sided way, a very pro-police way, a very anti-progressive way. And that is not a framing that is remotely rooted in reality. So I encourage everybody to be, to take with a grain of salt all of these very dubious narratives about how crime is spiking and how it's the lefties' fault. And I just want to take a moment, you guys, to note that, I see this, I'm from the Seattle area, so I see a lot of this rhetoric about the homeless in Seattle and, oh God, and people act as though, well, it's a lefty city, so it must be left-wing politics that are leading to that. You guys, that is a completely backwards interpretation of it. Lefties want housing policy. Lefties want to literally give houses to the homeless. There's not a quicker or more simple or direct way to solve the homelessness crisis than to literally just solve it by giving them homes. Okay? So the idea that people are out on the streets because of lefty policy is totally and utterly insane. Lefties want more rehab facilities and more mental health services to help people who are currently stuck on the streets. Lefties want jobs programs and unemployment insurance programs that help people who are currently out of work. Lefties want healthcare and education systems and public park systems that uplift all of us. The idea that because a left-leaning city has a problem with this, it must be because of lefty policies, is just a misinterpretation of how politics in this country work at all. You might have a city like Seattle where the voters might actually be pretty progressive, but don't make the mistake of thinking that means the policy implemented by the city is progressive. We're in the most right-wing country one can imagine, right? We have our Democrats are right in line with a lot of conservative parties around the planet. Our left-wing Bernie Sanders types are moderates on a global scale. So we're cartoonishly right-wing. Don't make the mistake of thinking that because some voters are progressive in some areas, that the policies enacted by those local governments are in line with those voters' desires. They're not. They're just not. And some of these big cities that are progressive in terms of the actual voter base, New York, LA, Seattle, Chicago, etc., have some of the worst problems with gentrification and with homelessness, etc. And that is due not to progressive policy, but quite the opposite. And I just really want to make that clear, you guys. those issues are not a result of left-wing voters. What they're a result of is the establishment desperately clinging on to power in whatever ways it possibly can, and then doing its worst on these cities. And then they turn around and say, but see, it's the progressives that are causing all this homelessness and despair. Fuck the progressives, So anyway, good work there from Alec. Good work from Mother Jones. And we will, as always, keep bringing you stories pertaining to how the media covers crime, because I think it's incredibly relevant and important. And I want to show you guys a tweet here from Mary Ann Williamson. She says, okay, that's it. Everybody needs to read Stephanie Kelton. Guys, I've talked a little bit more about MMT today than I usually do. I try to sometimes tie some big stories back into that MMT understanding, but MMT is absolutely crucial, absolutely critical. If you do not know what I'm talking about when I say modern monetary theory, I once again want to encourage you all to go to realprogressives.org for all of our educational content, for articles on MMT, for podcasts on MMT, etc. Also want to encourage, as Marianne did there, to encourage the audience to read Stephanie Kelton. The Deficit Myth is a fantastic primer into MMT if you are not familiar with the concept. So it's just wonderful to see. I wanted to kind of close on a story here that's positive. It's wonderful to see MMT getting some legs under it and starting to have people like Marianne Williamson encouraging people to get informed on these crucial macroeconomic issues, and perhaps sometime in the near future we have a political environment where the discourse is not so misframed from an economic perspective, an environment that might be a little bit more friendly to progressives. So good on Marianne there for not just reading Stephanie Kelton and informing herself on MMT, but encouraging others to do the same. I'm encouraged to see that MMT is gaining some prevalence here. And as I mentioned earlier, even the outrage about MMT is a sign that we are starting to gain some ground. So wonderful stuff to see there. Realprogressives.org if you want to find all of our educational content on MMT or anything else for that matter. We have great articles, great podcasts, Macro and Cheese with our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine, the Up and Up with Jody Newell, where she talks with activists on Real Progress in Action. You catch my show on Sundays on Real Progress in Action, 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific. And make sure that you're also subscribed to Real Progressives, our other YouTube channel, so that you're not missing any of our fantastic content. And with that, you guys, I will go ahead and call it a stream. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. Everybody in the chat, really appreciate your involvement. Want to thank everybody who gave a super chat or a super sticker or anything of the sort. We appreciate all of the help we can get. Realprogressives.org/donate if you'd like to become a monthly patron or just give us a one-time donation. We really do appreciate any and all help that you can possibly provide. With that, I will go ahead and call it a stream. Thanks to Len for a wonderful interview. Congratulations to her and her team and all of the Starbucks workers across the country. Want to encourage everybody to get involved with that labor movement, etc., etc. With that, have a wonderful week. I will see you all at the regular time next Sunday, 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific.